Okay, we'll commence the meeting. Firstly, I'll call for apologies, and we have so far Māngai Whetū, full apology, and Councillor Pascoe has to go for part of the meeting in the middle, and Councillor O'Leary will be here sometime after 10. Any other apologies?
I have Dave.
Yeah, Sarah, sorry.
So, I was going to say, I'm on Zoom for the first 7 minutes, and then I'll be there in person. But I have something on at 4, which I might be able to move if necessary, but depending on how long the meeting's going.
I've consulted the Deputy Mayor, and he says we'll be finished by before then. Yeah.
Right. Brilliant.
Thank you. Maxine.
And I'll join the meeting this afternoon via Zoom.
Okay, thanks. Any other apologies? If not, I'll move they be accepted. Those in favour? Oh, sorry, Ryan seconded. Those in favour, against, carried. Thanks. Councillor, some confirmation of the agenda. You've got the run sheet in front of you, but I've also suggesting that we bring item 9, Nydia growth projections, forward to follow number 6, the Chair's report. Rob's expressed a wish to be here if possible for that, and I think it's good as many as people as possible for that particular one, so if that's okay with you, I'll move that order with number 9 elevated, also seconded by Ryan. Any discussion? If not, those in favour, against, that's carried. Thanks. Okay, we do have a public forum written submission, which, can you tell us about that, Amy?
So you will find on Diligent that there is a written submission from Roger Stratford. It has been uploaded, and he is speaking in, writing in this case, to the HUGS report.
Okay. Yes.
Do we have an intention to, as I quote, restore the family to its pre-woke preeminence by providing for Christian worship venues and ironically favouring pale male style, instill an entrepreneurial spirit by fostering private ownership based on accumulated capital?
I don't have that in front of me, but the pale male style, looking out of this council room, I was recognising some of that.
Yeah, I've been working on my tan. Rather than an affirmative action to overindulge minorities, are we intending to add that as one of our guiding principles?
I'm going to rule that we can't ask questions on that because the submitter isn't present.
Fair enough. Okay.
Because we won't get any sensible answers.
That is a shame.
We would, like we would have if he had been present.
Yeah.
Councillor Wilson seems a little surprised at this. Maybe it's early in the morning for him. Okay, thank you. I'll move that we note the public forum submission and receive it. That's all we can do. Seconded by Councillor Bunting. Those in favour or against, that's carried. Thanks. Is there anything else we have to do?
Declarations of interest.
Oh yeah, declarations of interest. Anyone got them on any item? If not, we'll move along. Confirmation of the open minutes from the 30th of March. Moved by Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Van Oosten. Any questions or issues arising? If not, I'll put that they be accepted as true and accurate record. Those in favour, against, that's carried. Thanks. Now, councillors, on to the Chair's report. Now, just firstly, an apology that it came in late, but not particularly an apology because the items were coming forward late, and my judgment, it was better to put them in front of you even if they're a few days late rather than wait a whole meeting cycle. So what I thought I'd do, and I'll just outline the process, is go through them section at a time and not go on to the late Chair's item. What are we calling that? The additional Chair's report until after we've done the one that was sent out on Monday, if you get what I mean. So we'll do them in that order. But just before we go into questions and discussion on that, I'd like to note to the meeting, this is General Manager Jen Baird's last meeting of the Strategic Growth Committee. She is terribly sad that she's not going to be available for any more of these, I hear, and she's concerned that she won't have such a good time in her new job as this one. But that aside, I'd like to thank Jen for your work for council over the years and for your excellent way of handling all the complaints and queries that came your way from the elected members, most of which were from the chair of this committee. We've really appreciated working with you and the way that you've got alongside us and understood where we were coming from, Jen. So thank you very much from me and on behalf of the committee as well.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
She's promised to come back in a new life as a submitter to us.
Particularly on the train.
Yeah. Okay, councillors. So we'll move through the items in the Chair's report, just noting that there are some recommendations arising from them, and if they're relevant to the particular chapter, if you like, we can discuss them as well. So, firstly, I should just get my order up here. I've got Councillor Wilson first, and the first item.
Right at the end.
Sorry?
Right at the end.
Yeah, I'm just. 3:13. Okay. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong page.
Ahead, I was wanting to talk about the Housing Acceleration Fund. And
yeah, we'll come to that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I just want to just do them in order because they're sort of different from each other. The UNISA meeting. Any queries about that? Okay. That's good. I just thought it would be good for us to have that sort of fairly complete rundown there, so that. Oh, Councillor Gallagher.
Obviously with Blair, we're going to have a real good discussion around, what we want out of the reforms, and I assume, as you alluded, the UNISA meeting is going to be, that triangle is going to be quite a critical part of that.
Which?
The UNISA, the work that has been done in UNISA will be highlighting some cross-boundary regional issues.
Certainly Blair puts them in the General Manager's report from time to time. On this occasion, Blair wasn't present at the meeting because he was helping another councillor in his first meeting as the delegate to the Waikato Plan, I understand. So I was that. He was Roberts up the back.
He was somewhere in the ether, but that was good. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. So this is it for this round of those meetings. Okay, sorry, the next part of that is the future southern urban growth areas. Were there any questions, comments on that?
You taking questions or comments?
On that, I'm taking both because I know you can't differentiate that easily.
No. Mr. Chair or Blair, can you confirm that you as Chair, I'll just ask you as Chair, can you confirm that you're extremely keen to actually, for Council to come to some agreement with Waipa particularly in a relatively short space of time, given that there's starting to feel a Groundhog Day about this stuff, and I'm totally aware of the Southern Links and the implications of that for our urban growth as a possible physical boundary on the west side of the river.
Yeah, look, I can confirm that we are extremely keen to get some movement in that area, starting with in terms of Waipa with the Strategic Boundary Agreement. Blair's office has been trying extremely hard for about the last year and a half to get a series of meetings. We've had a couple. The most recent one's been delayed a bit, but it's just been rearranged for early next month. And we want to get that overarching strategic boundary agreement with them like we already have with Waikato District. And then we'll get into discussing particular proposals like this one, for instance. Blair, did you want to add anything to that?
Look, I think that's it's a good summary, Chair. The meeting's on the 2nd of June, and we are certainly look. It's very useful to have this information from the southern property owners, and it certainly helps in the conversation. I think the key here is that Waipa understands the integrated work that we're doing, not only with inquiries with landowners, but our development of the Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy update, the principles that we have, so they understand the wider context for why advancing strategic land agreement is so important to what we're talking about.
Through the chair, do you want them to understand, or do they understand?
Well, they understand, but they would like to understand some more information. So it's important that we help them appreciate the wider context that sits behind the request.
Okay.
And that is why the chair and I are meeting with the mayor and the chief executive and the deputy mayor from Waipawa on the 2nd of June to advance that.
So, again, through the chair, presumably you'll give us an update from that 2nd of June meeting, and there's two courses that, yes, this is really going well, or if it's not, then obviously we will have a further refined approach to this one.
Yeah, look, I might point out that it also relates to the HUGs or MUGs principles as well, which are coming up later in the meeting, and which we will also, once we have them as a draft set of principles, any proposal that comes before us, we give those principles to them and say, guys, if you want to proceed, you have to satisfy us in these areas. Here's where we want you to be heading. If you can handle those or work out the way that your proposal will fit within them, then by all means, let's help you progress it.
So I think, through the chair, you're saying that probably a more constructive discussion, we know the direction of travel from our point of view, a more constructive discussion will happen after June the 2nd, and could you confirm that these whole issues will be a classic good example of our submissions that we'll eventually make to the major review of local government?
I would imagine so. You're probably alluding to the issue that Hamilton doesn't have much land within its legal boundary in which it can grow, as opposed to some council back in 1989 chose very small boundaries. Yeah.
Absolutely. Learn from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no other question on that one, we'll just move on to the Housing Acceleration Fund. Now, I'm going to ask Blair, if you don't mind, if you can come up to the table, because I know Councillor Wilson's got some questions, and this part of the report has specifically come from Blair. Ewan, do you want to fire away on the...
Yeah, thanks, Chair Dave. First of all, I think it's great that we're in a prime position, and I congratulate you and your chair and deputy chair for all the work that goes on behind the scenes to enable us. I'm just particularly interested in the areas we've prioritised, and my good council colleague Sarah highlighted this to me with some issue, just highlighted this issue for me. I'm a little concerned that we're not sending a clear prioritisation by listing pretty much every growth area, and I would have thought our real opportunity is the central city and Enderley. And so walk me through why we're talking about Rotokauri, particularly in light of the fact that this council currently hasn't funded the infrastructure necessary for rapid growth, because we still have concerns about the costs. So could you just walk me through why you've prioritised, well, you've mixed them all, where I feel there's an opportunity to prioritise at least 2 ahead of the 5?
So I think, Councillor, we haven't as yet determined or finalised which of those proposals Hamilton would advance through the Future-Proof Partnership on this criteria. So what is there is me outlining early thinking, which is obviously coming through our extensive work and our work with you, work with Future-Proof, work with the various work streams, and in conversations with government colleagues as well. The criteria for the fund are yet to be publicly released. So again, some of this is our early thinking based on what we know, but of course, when we understand the criteria, which we hope will become available sometime in June, we can then start to firm up and put more detail around this. The purpose of the fund, as I understand it, and has been publicly released, is to accelerate the delivery of housing where there are defined funding challenges and gaps. And so if you look at, say, Rotokauri, for example, as one of the questions you've raised, Rotokauri is an area where we have identified is a growth area, but it has a funding challenge. It is zoned. We have willing developers who are talking to our team all the time, who are wanting to find solutions, but there is a funding challenge, and this is where this fund is exactly targeted to help. So that's why Rotokauri is there. And I guess when we think about Rotokauri, and in fact the report there says Rotokauri, Te Rapa North, right through to Te Awa Lakes. There is multiple developers in there at various stages of working with council. Te Awa Lakes has a private plan change and a development agreement with council. Rotokauri Stage 2, Charles Marr has a special housing area and a PDO with council. So they are advanced in their conversation with us. Likewise, Stage 1, we have two big developers in there who are working with us to try and find solutions. So Rotokauri is a strong candidate for what we know about that fund, because it is a funding challenge where Rotokauri, but for money, can't get away. Central City absolutely is a key pillar of our thinking, and that is why it's there, and that's why we want to work with MHUD and Kaingaroa to explore what does a Central City proposal look like. The Central City, through the NPS UD work, is going to obviously have a greater focus in terms of housing and housing densification, and with that will be infrastructure potentially required to unlock that. The challenge that I would just, or the opportunity for us, is how to demonstrate defined developer outcomes and yield from a Central City where it's owned in multiple parcels of individual property owners, as opposed to some of the greenfield areas where it's one or two or three bigger developers. If I look at Enderley, and we've said Enderley Ruakura, Enderley is going to be a focus already for Kaingaroa. They've identified that as an area where they're going to spend a lot of money to regenerate and densify Enderley. The linkage with Enderley to Ruakura is really quite important, because it links the strong direction of the landowners in Ruakura, Tainui, around some residential development there in the tramway precinct, and the linkage there to the employment precinct of Ruakura, but it's a very strong linkage back to Enderley. So we see Enderley Ruakura as a combined package, not at the expense of Enderley, but to enhance that. But I think, Councillor Wilson, this is just all emerging thinking. Once we see the true criteria, then we can actually work with our government colleagues to understand where are we best going to get the best outcomes collectively by advancing proposals.
So thanks, Mr. Chair. I've got a few more questions if I could, because I think this is a really critical area, Blair. Are you not at all concerned that by sending a clear message that we're really interested in Rotokauri, without having really understood the potential financial consequences for this council, it's a little premature? I'm accepting that the fund, that the Accelerated Housing Fund, is to assist areas where there is financial challenge, but it does, and it would it not, trigger a significant co-investment from this city?
Look, and that's exactly where the proposal process and the evaluation process and the application process would tease out all those very issues. So, of course, councillors, the financial considerations are a critical part of us as a council being comfortable with any application.
Right.
And I liken the process that we will go through as the same process we went through for the Housing Infrastructure Fund in Peacock. And councillors who were here will recall that when we went through that process, was a two-stage process. We did a high-level indicative business case for Rotokauri and for Peacock, submitted an individual one for Rotokauri, individual one for Peacock, and actually a combined for both areas. The government then selected Peacock, and then we went through a detailed process, and that ultimately tested all those matters in detail, and then ultimately council said we're happy to proceed. Right. So I see the same thing here, Councillor Wilson.
Okay. So, yeah.
Sorry, I'll come back to you. Just wondering if perhaps we could have a workshop on, once we know the details, prior to it coming back to the committee with a specific proposal. So I'm just thinking of inserting something into the process if we can. I know staff will blanch at trying to get more workshop spaces, but I think it's probably a useful idea given
Yeah.
how the discussion's going.
I think that would be really helpful. I only have two more quick questions, but I think that would be really helpful because it's a significant issue for us. Blair, I hear your point, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think I've understood you to say that one of the advantages with pursuing Rota Kauri is there are 4 larger landowners, so it's easier to manage. Are you being? Are we as a council being pressured by those 4 well-resourced large developers who are just hungry to gobble up green space? Are we coming under pressure?
Look, we have conversations with developers every day from across the city, inside and out. So this is what's happening day in, day out, councillor. So a simple answer: landowners from across the city are enthusiastic about this potential fund. What I would say in the case of Rota Kauri, council needs to be aware it is zoned. That land is enabled. Those developers are actively working with us on a daily basis to try and advance their land aspirations. And of course, our long-term plan has given us where our position is in terms of funding. So I think I'd look at this as a significant opportunity, but it's an opportunity which we have yet to make any formal proposals to. I'm foreshadowing for you early thinking.
Okay, so one final question, and I'll try to keep it brief, and hopefully you'll keep your answer brief too. Could you tell me the exact quantums that you're referring to that we've put in our LTP to enable such a joint funding of Rota Kauri? Because I'd be interested in exactly when in the next 10 years we've already allocated funds for such a opportunity.
So that is what the business case application process would tease out. I don't have those numbers in front of me now, Councillor Wilson. But
have we put funds in the LTP for such a thing?
The LTP has funding for Rota Kauri, but it is at the back end of the LTP in terms of the substantive construction. So again, that is why, and this fund is about where all funding, current funding resources have been exhausted. That is one of the areas the fund is targeting to advance housing delivery.
Right. So, Mr. Chair, I guess I'll just signal a desire that I may want to move just an amendment that frames our priorities. I'm just concerned the way it is currently that we've said there are 6 areas, and okay,
Yeah, 5.
did I? Yeah, maybe I counted Te Rapa North as 2. Yeah, okay, sorry. And sort of have a 2-tier, because I'm just signalling because.
Well, okay, so fine to signal. Have a look at the resolution when it comes up on board, which is going to include a workshop, and I'm going to have a bit of a discussion at the end about what would be in that workshop, what would be in front of us, which may satisfy the initial request, because we don't have any information in front of us as other than what you've heard just now, really.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yep. But we'll come back to opportunity to come back to that. I've got Councillor Sarah next.
Thank you, Chair. Blair, could you please just, I guess, summarise briefly what we've fed into the criteria in terms of that process for the Housing Acceleration Fund?
So the criteria have been developed by the government, not us.
Yeah, but it's said in the paper.
Yeah, so look, we've had some conversations with officials who are working on that, and I guess it's really our experience on how we feel that any proposals can be best advanced in terms of working with councils, working with urban growth partnerships, making sure that the criteria reflect the direction where we are going in terms of in our partnerships, our urban growth partnerships with the government and our other partners. So, and I guess it's drawing on our experience from the HIF work. So. Yeah, look, it's high-level conversations, Councillor Sarah, with respect to how we feel the fund can be best used to assist councils to advance areas where housing is unable to be delivered because of our funding and financial constraints.
Okay, and in terms of some of the things that this council is trying to achieve around, for example, the 20-minute city concept and building compact city with integrated transport systems, strategic transport outcomes over with Urukura and the Metro Spatial Plan, regeneration of some of our existing areas like Enderley and supporting, like through our housing strategy, that's a key part of that is to be working alongside Kāinga and Enderley. I'm just wondering, to what extent do our priorities can they be driving what we put forward in terms of any application? And I guess that comes to that workshop, but where does this council's priorities actually kind of drive the outcomes?
Look, I think they're fundamental to it, councillor. So again, the urban growth partnerships and the Metro Spatial Plan that we have in Future Proof speaks to all of what you've just talked about, and that will be core to any thinking in that application. So absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I'll wait to see that motion around that workshop, but I'm also very interested in that. Thank you.
I guess the comment I would just make, councillors, is this is high level information ahead of anything being announced, trying to give you some visibility of the opportunity that Hamilton has. No decisions have been made, nothing has been advanced. It really is early thinking, but anything that we would talk and work with you collectively on and work with our future-proof partners and the government will be highly aligned with everything that we as a council are talking about and wanting to achieve in terms of growth. So there is nothing here around developers determining what the future is. This is very much in terms of how we want to see our city develop in the future, in line with all the strategies and direction that we have agreed.
Councillor Bunting.
Yeah, okay, so I think that's pretty well been teased out. Actually, I'm on the same lines as you two, and that is we really don't have that level of detail as to what this will and will not fund and influence. So that would probably be more apparent during that workshop. Is that right?
Yeah, look, I think at the moment this is just an early heads up to say that this is
Available.
what we understand, this is
Yeah.
available. Once we have that detailed workshop, will be very appropriate.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Look, I just would say on this that when Blair raised this issue with me, I encouraged him to do this late notice, heads up to us, if you like. If we were in any other council or even any previous council of this lot, we probably wouldn't be hearing about it until it would have been half worked through. We're getting a really early bite at it, so you can't expect too many details, and the purpose of this is to get us to start thinking about it ahead of when we have to think about it. So I'm appreciative of Blair putting this in front of us, but don't expect any final answers today. Rob, thanks.
Yeah, a question around when you mention Enderley, are you talking also about Fairfield?
I mean, I guess it's the area, Jen can probably better define it, but it's that sort of wider Poets Corner sort of whole precinct. But Jen, did you want to define Enderley?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it hasn't been clearly defined. We talk about Enderley because that's where, from a Kāinga Ora perspective, a fair chunk of their intense social housing is. Yep. But I think as we go through this, that in partnership with them, understanding what their development aspirations look like, it could be broader than that, maybe further up towards Chubbell.
I'm just reflecting. I went to Fairfield Park last Friday, as a good number of us did, and right surrounding Fairfield Park are all of these many of them still state houses, which were built 70 years ago, which are on quarter-acre sections.
Yeah.
And, it seems to me like there's a development, there's an intensive development of land that KO already own, they won't own all the sections there, but they'll own a good number of them. And it seems to me like this is part of the 20-minute city. That is
exactly the opportunity, and it is exactly what Kāinga Ora have been investigating for the last 18 months or so, and are laying out an investment plan for that regeneration.
And I know in one of those streets, I think it's Ross Crescent, where they've already started on some sort of development there of taking 3 or 4 sections and putting 10 to 12 dwellings on those sections.
And I guess ultimately for council, what will be one of the considerations will be the government are intending to do a number of things through Kāinga Ora anyway. How do we, through potential of this fund, look to enhance or extend that or against our own growth strategies? And the second thing would be, if it is going to be grant funding, what is the government seeking in return from those who benefit from that grant funding? So in the case of effectively infrastructure that's subsidised or provided for free, what are those who benefit, the development community, going to provide in terms of potentially concessions, either concessionary zoning, maybe some upside to the lands trust, maybe guaranteed yield of housing of certain levels in a certain time frame. So all those things are yet to be worked through, but I clearly see that there's going to be a very robust negotiation with the various parties to deliver the outcomes that the money would be aligned to.
And just one final question. Are we keeping a little bit of a scope over other areas of land in the city? And I immediately think of the Te Rapa racecourse, for example, which has been the racing industry has been subject to fairly major review, and they now have a synthetic track at Cambridge, and the fact that, there are sizable pockets of land maybe like that around the city, which are not part of our greenfields development needs, and the infrastructure is already there?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
we are.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Ryan, thanks.
Blair, in terms of, I guess, some concern from elected members about development getting away, isn't that sort of partly addressed in our hugs later today in terms of defining key principles that are the yardstick to make sure that nothing can get away without zero cost to council and those other things?
Correct. I mean, and those principles are relating to things that are in areas that aren't planned, out of sequence or out of boundary. So you're quite correct, Councillor Ryan. And I guess my understanding would be that the Housing Acceleration Fund and the criteria will tend to steer us to those areas which are planned or are a fair way through our known growth strategy. So there's one level of control there straight away. But certainly the principles, the growth funding policy, all the other growth strategy we have will be front and centre as we think about any application council puts forward to ensure those controls are in place.
Thank you. And also, obviously, our district plan will make sure that it's aligned with we're congruent in what we're trying to achieve.
I guess I come back to think of this as another version of the Housing Infrastructure Fund process we went through 4 or 5 years ago, where we had peacocks, but for funding we couldn't deliver peacocks. And ultimately, council, it will be your decision as to whether any proposal goes in, and I would imagine it'll be a stage gate process, the same as the Housing Infrastructure Fund, where high-level applications, they'll be shortlisted, those that go forward the next stage, and ultimately you will always make a decision as to whether you are comfortable or not. And I see this as the same situation.
And final question, Blair, you mentioned that there's a potential in its early days, but with the infrastructure fund, we potentially could do a combination of things to get things over the line that are going to be help with the facilitation of funding.
I mean, and in the General Manager's report, there's an update on how we're exploring converting some of the Housing Infrastructure Fund loan to a IFF structure. That would certainly be part of any consideration that council has as these matters develop. So there are many things that we are progressing or pursuing as a council to try and ensure that we can continue to deliver a range of solutions for our growing city. And I think, against all of this, we have this lens around what is the housing need both now and in the future for our community. And I guess that's what's underpinning this initiative. The government have clearly said there's a shortage of housing across the country. There's a shortage of housing in high growth areas. They provide this tool to help us respond to that.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Councillors, we'll go to the resolutions now, and just what we do when we're doing that, we'll look at the change or addition to point E that staff have concocted for me. I hope. Noting that a workshop with members will be required prior to the report coming to the committee. Now that's reasonably general, but the workshop specifically refers, oh hang on, so that's in the wrong area, it should be an E, not C, D, because it specifically refers to the Housing Acceleration Fund. That's what the workshop purpose is, sorry. So we're just putting that, and remove it from D, thanks, so that's not relevant there.
So Councillor McPherson, the only, I guess you and I can just work if we haven't got the criteria in time, and of course I'm aware many of you are away for a substantial period of July, we may just come into a situation where
I think, yeah, the purpose of that timing from me was to meet what you're expecting the deadline to be. So if we haven't got the criteria by then, I'm expecting the deadline itself will be pushed out, and therefore we would take a decision which we can just report in the chair's report or something the next meeting, that we've had to delay it for a meeting cycle. But if that deadline holds, then we're going to need to do some detailed work on it beforehand, and before it comes to the committee. That's the purpose of that time frame at this stage. Best we can, best information we have. So look, I don't want to hold discussion on the exact wording. It is reasonably general because we don't know, but I think Ryan and I will be working with management to make sure that the issues that have been highlighted here get discussed and have a chance for everyone to have a say at the workshop, which then will form guidance to staff on the recommendation to put back to us at the next committee meeting. That's the purpose of that. And issues like what our strategy is, are we being pushed in a particular direction, or are we playing a leading role in determining what areas might go forward as the priority areas? That's obviously a key question for councillors. And for staff too, I might add, and that's going to be the purpose or the outcome we'd hope to get from the workshop. So with that sort of noting in mind, I'm hoping that will enable the discussion that all of you want. So I'm going to move all the recommendations there. Happy to have, seconded by Councillor Gallagher. And I will speak to it just briefly. It's sort of a chicken and egg situation. We're jumping in ahead of this, but like I said, in terms of the Housing Acceleration Fund, if we're not ahead of the game, we'll be waiting in a queue behind Queenstown and Auckland and Tauranga and so forth. I would like for us to be ahead. We got a large dollop of support for Peacock by being ahead of the game with the Housing Infrastructure Fund not too many years ago. We wouldn't have got that growth cell off the ground, as it were, literally in the case of the bridge. And I think given the growth pressures on Hamilton, we have to be as far ahead of the game as possible. And that's not playing favourites with which particular area, but we have to enable the supply of affordable housing at a greater level in the city than we have been able to in recent times. We have to prepare for that. And I'm absolutely keen that we look at any opportunities that come up and have a really good look at them, not let them tell us where the city should develop, but to make sure that whatever support's going around, we can get more than our fair share of it, really. So that's the purpose of supporting that. And some of the other issues like the UNISA discussions are similar to that. They want to, one of the issues with that attracted my attention, they want to look at future transport links for the whole of the Upper North Island, not just between Hamilton and Auckland, but Whangarei, basically around the ports from North Port, Auckland Port, Hamilton is the inland port, if you like, area, across to Tauranga, and how they all work together. And for a long time into the future, and that's really important in this sort of area as well. And just one other small story which just came up in the last day to demonstrate the sort of problem we have with housing availability and affordability in the city. I've been helping a member of my family look at getting into a home in Hamilton, a very ordinary family home in Melville, which has a rateable value of $470,000. The real estate agent told us that the expectation, the marketing behind the scenes, if you like, was for a $900,000 sale. That's practically double, and the going rate that I'd observed a month ago was about 1.5 times, so 1.6 times. That's I think we're going to see a lot more of things like that, and that's the sort of problem. Absolutely unaffordable at the moment, so we have to make moves in this whole area, and Blair outlined some of the possible range of moves. So I'm keen that we work as hard as we can to open up those opportunities and actually be able to house our younger families in future. So that's me. I've got Councillor Sarah next.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to speak in regard to the Housing Acceleration Fund and note, in terms of the workshop, that I would really like to see us have a workshop which seeks clear direction from elected members around priorities for these applications once we have the criteria in view, and certainly not keen to have a workshop where we're kind of more informed this is where we're going. So I would really like to see us get in there early and be able to drive that direction, because I think that we've got some great opportunities if with this potential funding to really further and align with the strategic directions that we've already set in terms of the Metro Spatial Plan, also with regeneration of our existing areas and the housing strategy. We've noted a key priority being to work with Kāinga in the Enderley area, and there's a fantastic opportunity to actually regenerate that area and create value for and enhance the community there. We often, I think that there's a risk that greenfield is favoured because it's easier to kind of calculate what yield you're going to get, but we shouldn't, just for the ease of calculating yield, then kind of potentially miss out on the opportunities that we have in terms of a 20-minute city, a compact city, regeneration of communities, and really potentially even investing in micromobility and public transport, because those are the kinds of things that unlock quality density. So it's just a bit of a direction, I guess, from myself in terms of what I would like to see us focus on. Thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Ewan, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Dave. Housing affordability is a crisis in our time. It is the elephant in the room. And I think what's exciting is there's not anybody in this chamber who's denying that problem. And we have an opportunity here with the HAF funding to start to address it. And I see the finer nuances within this chamber as how we best direct those funds if we're able to achieve it. And like Councillor Sarah, I'm hoping that we will have a critical role in influencing and analysing the areas of the city that would be best suited and is most urgent. And I can't accept the current level of deprivation that we have in some neighbourhoods, that we miss an opportunity to try to address it. And I can't let go by an opportunity to not try to focus and leverage off our current transportation strategy and trying to make the best out of that. I received an interesting letter just a few days ago from a financial advisor highlighting 30 properties sold in the last 6 weeks, and interestingly, the average was 110% above their current GV in the city of Hamilton, which is sort of similar to what you've just encountered. That is horrifying. So we've got to release more opportunity for affordable housing. This is about trying to get the best return on the investment for our ratepayers while ensuring we manage growth that is consistent with our broader strategies. And so I'm just really keen that we are at the coalface making and influencing that decision, because in 10 or 20 years' time, people will look back at this council and say there was a crisis in their time. How did they manage it? How did they take ownership of it? Did they get it right? And our children and our grandchildren will be the ones living in those homes, and they'll be asking the question, did they choose the right areas? Did they choose the right strategy? Or were they railroaded into yet another project that cost huge amounts of money and didn't deliver? So I think we've got one chance to get it right.
Thank you. Well timed. Councillor Mark.
Thank you. And Councillor Wilson's last point segues nicely into the thrust of what I want to mention today. I think, first of all, never look a gift horse in the mouth. It's great. And thank you, Blair and team, for the great work you're doing in initiating this contact. Bear in mind that when the HIF came along, we were in a position to service it. Our debt capacity will be maxed out by the time we even enter into these conversations. So we don't have the leeway to enter into a similar agreement with them. So our financial position is quite different. And that's fine. That's, that'll be accepted. I also agree with some of the points made earlier on by various councillors around the table that this has got to be doable. It's not good enough just to provide more houses without providing appropriate transport links. And I think particularly to Papanui, Enderley, and I've often talked with Tainui and the likes about how this will be a major employment source, Ruakura, for Enderley, but it's going to be no good if they can't get there, if we haven't got those links set up well. So I'm hoping through this workshop we'll be able to find out just how deep this funding goes and what we can use it for, because we could find ourselves with wonderful housing here, wonderful housing there, wonderful housing there, and us not being able to afford to provide a route for them to get there. So I'm really interested in finding out more detail. I see it as a really positive initiative, but bear in mind that it's not the same environment that it was 5 years ago. There are different pressures on us.
Thank you. Councillor Robb.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Councillor Mark. I'll remove those comments about our debt to revenue ratio that I was going to talk about.
He's after your job, I think.
But the last time we had a major property price crisis in New Zealand was in the 70s. And if central government, as they did eventually then, manages it right, it will avert that crisis from getting worse than what it is. So I'm hopeful that we will get some of the methods and policies that were attached in the 1970s to adjust that. It just seems to be very slow in terms of happening now. But given Mark's comments, I do want to say that I think our success in being able to tap into any of this money will, in my view, only come about if we have a partner with us doing that. And I think of our recent successes and our lack of success in some of the shovel-ready projects. Our biggest success, of course, was the joint deal with Tainui on the Ruakura and Eastern bypass. So I think there's an opportunity here for us to sit alongside maybe Kangora and see what they can do with property that they currently own around the city. I touched on Fairfield, but there are areas of Melville where those same 70-year-old houses on quarter-acre sections exist, and there are no doubt other areas around town when in the 50s many state houses were built. And it seems to me like this is our 20-minute city, rather than trying to expand the city out into greenfields, that we have an immediate opportunity with a partner who is already committed to affordable housing to jointly do that. So if there's an opportunity in this workshop that we're going to have, it would be useful to have them and any other potential partners perhaps sitting in or out of the sessions that we might run with this. And so I do suggest that the Chair and Deputy Chair and Management look at what opportunities we could have around the potential of working with those particular groups. Thanks.
Mayor Paula, thanks.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, we all know we need houses, but we don't build houses. We plan and create the rules that influence those who do build the homes. We have to be the enabler. That's our key role here, planning and enabling. and taking away any barriers for those who actually build the houses to do what they do, which is build houses. And we need to go them to go in areas where we can drive quality outcomes. I've said all along that we need to build communities around houses, not just plonk houses in and expect people to thrive in those situations. And of course, the denser a city becomes, the more infill there is, the more necessary it is to make sure that you provide for those community type assets for people to connect and enjoy, like green space, like libraries, like some place to have some recreation, some sports, those kind of things become even more important, and so does the ability for people to move around using whatever mode of transport they choose, and having a choice to be able to move quickly around those areas. So I'm a great fan of this approach. The caution that Mark raised is a fair one, and Rob's been consistent about that message. We can only do what we can afford. So we've got to play in our lane, and I think we've got to play in the lane which is planning, enabling, bringing partners to the table. That's where we play.
Thank you. Councillor Ryan.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, some good points all around. I think it's important to remember that in order to have a healthy, attractive Hamilton economy that attracts people and families here, we need to have more supply, and that's both infill and greenfield. We need urban regeneration and we need density, but we've also got to give people choice. And I have to keep reiterating this, we need multiple typologies. Density and infill alone won't deliver that. And I'm sort of leaping ahead to an item in a couple of points' time, which all of us have contributed to in terms of proposed principles for out-of-sequence growth, and Councillor Sarah was a great contributor to that. Something called 15-minute neighbourhoods. So something we've never done with our Greenfields development before is actually getting the process right. 15-minute neighbourhoods, compact and accessible, affordable housing choices, sustainable and integrated infrastructure solutions, a significant portion of land value uplift, which we've never done. Well, we can do a lot better. Places for recreation, protecting culture and heritage, responding to climate change, growing green areas and biodiversity. And might I remind us that the National Policy Statement on productive soils also goes some way to protect those areas of greenfield development so we don't just sprawl out in inconsidered manners. So we need both, and it's important we do it well. And I recognise Mark's point on the HIF. It's a bit like an iPhone that you got 6 years ago that you can't use anymore because it's outdated. We're not looking at HIF models because it's debt. No matter how you shape it up or put makeup on it, it's still big, ugly debt. The IFF and the HAF are not going to be debt models. They're going to be new integrative solutions which don't burden council. So I just encourage us to keep an open mind and to know that it's not one or the other, but multiple choices to get us out of this housing crisis. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thank you for your report. I certainly don't want to go over the ground that I think have been very well covered by previous speakers. I will, as I am inclined to do, heap praise, and I'm going to praise on B, and thanks to you and the Mayor's Office for, if you like, raising the profile of UNISAR. That is, while it's the big, huge regional group, but the work that they are doing obviously has relevance. In terms of the Southern Growth Cell and strategy, I will say this, and I say this with great respect and affection for Waipa Council. There's a point at which they will say yes or no. And then if it's a no, it's off to local government commission, or it's an example of how local government in this country needs massive reform. And I'm hoping that the reform process will be bold because territorial authorities up and down the country are absolute experts of trying to talk the government of the day out. The last 10 years we have talked about local government reform since I've been in this place as a new councillor, and it's it's talk and talk fest. So I think what we're going to try and do with regard to the Southern Link, Southern Urban Growth Field, really will bring that. And I don't want to have another year of chat. Obviously, I'm looking forward to where, we get some, what is Waipa's position exactly? We get definitive, we either have a definitive agreement or we don't, or we seek an alternative path. But it's really good, looking forward to the workshop, and certainly emphasise what Paul and Ryan have said and others in terms of why we're here. We're here to get a range of good, sensible, affording urban growth options, 20-minute, 15-minute city and housing. Thank you.
There's no other speakers. Okay, councillors, that's the end of the speaking. I'll move to put the recommendation, which is about to go back up on the wall, on the board. Is it? Sorry, just wait there. It's what's written in here, but with the addition in point E of the workshop. Yeah, there. Yep, there it is. Okay, so that's been moved and seconded. I'll just take a show of hands vote. Those in favour, raise their hands. And on Zoom, thanks. Yep, that's unanimous. Thank you. Councillors, we're going to move to the additional Chair's report, which down the bottom, just before the public forum written submissions. Sorry? Yeah, that's right. It's called the Chair's Report Plus. And this, again, came up even later than the other information, but if we don't make this sort of decision now, we miss out, or it can only be a staff report rather than a council report. This is the opportunity to put in a report to the Infrastructure Commission. Blair, did you need to say anything else about it?
Really only briefly, Chair, obviously there was an item in the executive update this week. This is a really important strategy that the Infrastructure Commission is developing, and it really speaks to how local government reform, waters reform, RMA reform, future of local government intersects with the fundamental challenge of infrastructure delivery across New Zealand. And this is across all sectors and all parts of New Zealand. And so it's important that we have our voice as part of that process, because it does, when you look at the strategy, it talks and dives into potentially future reform of local government, how infrastructure is delivered, how it's funded, the housing challenges we face. So it really does go, it's a very, I guess, comprehensive assessment of some of the challenges and opportunities to deliver infrastructure. So I think it's important that our voice as a Metro Council, because Metro Councils feature heavily, is heard in that process.
Thanks. Look, I'm looking for a couple of other councillors other than Ryan and myself, or in addition to, I should say, that are interested in going on this. It'll be mainly by email. So I've got Councillor Mark as one and Councillor Sarah as the other. So if we add those two names into the resolution, if that's okay, and we're certainly, other people are most welcome to have input in that, and we'll advise people of how. I'll put that up as the resolution with probably noting that the names of the 4 elected members in there as well that we've proposed. So any questions on this before we move to a vote on it? Mayor Paula, thanks.
Yeah, just the process for keeping the rest of the members, because it's unusual to form a working party like this, but that's fine, because I think it's good to have people who are keen on the work to do some work on it. I just want to make sure where it gets reported to before it, you do the work, but it comes back to the broader council through how and when.
The submissions close on the 24th of June, so there's certainly not going to be another meeting of this committee.
So can you refresh me on the 4 names?
Myself and Ryan as Chair and Deputy Chair, plus Mark and Sarah.
So what?
And then it's going to get circulated, the draft, to every elected member anyway.
Fair enough. I just wondered also why the Chair of Infrastructure shouldn't be on there, because I think that's,
I'm most happy that you volunteered
That makes-
Angela to go on.
well, I'm not volunteering her, but I think I've always been keen on protecting people's portfolios, and Angela is the chair of
Yeah,
infrastructure.
no, I think that's a fair comment, and Angela's willing to be added. I'm sure we won't have a problem with an extra person casting her eye over it. The only person who might have a problem with that is that person herself.
Oh, well, too late, Angela, you're in. Thank you.
Yep, so we'll add that, with your permission, we'll add that in as well. Sarah?
There's, on the 8th of June, there's Infrastructure Operations Committee, and then 10th, there's a council meeting. So, I mean, I wonder if we just add that. Should
Well,
it come back to a committee?
That's
a meeting?
not very, the problem is not the dates of the meetings, it's the dates papers have to be
Yeah,
in for the
right.
meetings, which we're just about on. That's the issue. Look, staff didn't have couldn't see an easy opportunity, which is why we didn't put one in there. Blair?
Yeah, I think to be fair to the staff, Councillor Thompson, there's a bit of work required to pull this together, so that timeframe is just too tight.
This won't be just sort of one of those 1.5 page submissions that we make on occasions, put it pro forma. It'll be more than that.
Mr Chair, it's very simple. You round robin, you get, and if there's no objection, you just, it's a consequential tick off. Don't put this discussion document on that other, what do you call it, the
SharePoint, the no one looks at.
SharePoint, the Air New Zealand Loyalty Club, but just give me email. But I think that's it's a good group, and good luck.
How many SharePoints have you earned so far,
Yeah,
Martin?
no, I'm not. Yeah, that's all good.
Thompson, I mean, or any councillor, once you've received the draft, if you want to meet with any of the staff, that's fine. So we're very happy to be flexible in that regard.
And look, I think we'll identify any sticking points and bring them to your attention in the best way possible, but it's just no easy formal way that we can see at the moment. Okay, so we'll go ahead with the resolution, the recommendation as is, with those 3 extra names in there. So I'll take a show of, I've moved that, seconded by Councillor Gallagher. Yeah, got him first. Those in favour raise their hands. Yep, that's unanimous, thanks. Was that a hand raise, Angela, when you were on the phone? Yep, okay. And look, councillors, we're going to item 9 now, which was signalled before. We're going to, and then we'll go, after this item, we'll go to a morning tea break, not an early lunch break like we had yesterday. If it goes on too long, it might have to be. Okay, and we have Nathan and Greg there. So
Morning.
one of you is going to...
Morning.
Morning.
Yep, hold on. Good morning, Mayor and councillors. So I'll take the report as read, but I'll make several introductory comments before taking questions. This report provides a summary and peer review of the recently released NIDIA 2021 growth projections, as requested at the 25th February council meeting. Elected members have expressed interest in moving from the existing NIDIA projections to a new and higher set of projections for use in the 2021-31 LTP. This report recommends moving to a higher population projection series, but to do this as part of the next annual plan, due to the risk to the timely adoption of the LTP if those underlying projections were changed now. To overcome the shortcomings of the NIDIA household projections, which were identified in the peer review on page 215 of this meeting's agenda, staff propose to develop a dwelling projections model using the skill sets and rich data that we have in-house. So I'm happy now to take questions on these and any other matters.
Yeah, could I just make an extra comment that I think that future dwelling projections model is quite important when you think about some of the transient populations, it's particularly around the university, that may not be registered as Hamilton residents, yet actually are in terms of the services and infrastructure we need. And the dwellings projection is going to more accurately reflect some of those points than what we have at the moment, just based on population. So that's just an extra comment from me. Got Councillor Jeff first.
Yeah, thanks for the report, and see where you're coming from with it. I guess I'm just trying to get a feel for what impact that might have on the annual plan, going to Nydia High in terms of extra infrastructure, extra costs.
Yep.
What's your feeling on that?
So in terms of the actual costs themselves, I probably can't comment on that myself. I might have to pass that over to Chris. But in terms of the household projections, which inform growth infrastructure, those projections are very similar to the set of projections we have now.
Yeah.
What has changed significantly, well, not significantly, but what has changed is the population predictions, and those generally drive level of service projects, and also community projects like libraries, parks, pools, etc. So I don't know if I can pass that question over to Chris around the actual costs.
Yeah, Councillor, my view would be the impacts would be minimal in the first few years, and I think it would be appropriate at the next 10-year plan to address it appropriately. Like effectively, if the growth is higher, it just means we need to accelerate our program. But already in the next 3 years, we have got a lot of infrastructure planning and processes in place to get ready for the growth curve. So I don't think there'll be immediate impact. I think we need to think about just more than just hard infrastructure. So I think demand management comes into this, and particularly the district plan that we're embarking on now is a great opportunity to look at water-sensitive techniques and demand management issues. So it's broader than just infrastructure. I think over the next 3 years it'll just be really, as we always do, just monitor where the growth is happening. I can see some pressure coming on with some developers maybe for upsize infrastructure that we haven't planned for and that we might need to address, but I think it'll be down that lower end of impact on our financial strategy. I'm also aware that we have a number of unfunded infrastructure projects in the 10 years, and maybe one or two, once again at the lower level in terms of our infrastructure spend that we might need to address. So in summary, I think the impacts will be relatively minor over the next 1 to 2 years.
Okay. So just a very quick, just to make sure. So in terms of our annual plan, should we expect much impact on like debt revenue headroom or rate rise, which I think is 4.9, what we've been talking about for that year? I mean, are you anticipating that?
No.
Okay, so we should be able to. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Rob.
Look, I'm not certain that I feel that confident with what answers I've got thus far, and I'm just wondering what management's advice to elected members should be around what lost opportunities. Forget about what we know about. What about the developers who will decide that they won't do anything because they know coming to us we're not going to be in a position to fund it anyway, or we haven't made provision for funding. So I'm a little bit, and I'm not sure how we might advance this, but I'm looking to management for advice back to elected members on what the lost opportunities are, whether this will result in further slowing of the city boundary growth, what the likely quantification is, and I guess as a backstop, if we can't do a little bit of blue sky thinking around this, what should we be planning for in enough time prior to the next LTP to make sure that we're not receiving this report when the next LTP is largely bedded down and we don't want to go back and change it again?
Yeah, sure. Look, I'll pick up some of that, remind me if there are bits of that I've missed. But I think that we have to, that this is the growth projections, and yes, it feeds into the LTP, but what these guys are talking about and doing in terms of that overlay of a dwellings model is using the more real-time data that we have at our fingertips and the intel that we know about to bring more useful, timely information to you. So that piece of work should improve the conversation that you have over the next 12, 24, 36 months, so that will improve these numbers going forward. The other part of this, though, is that this stuff is not set in stone, that you also have, every annual plan and you have every 6 weeks at finance to make other decisions for where you want to spend money, if you want to speed things up or slow things down. In terms of your conversation about developers, we are always having conversations with developers who are trying to understand exactly when and where our investment is happening, and we signal that through the LTP. But outside of that, I mean, the exact conversation that we're having now about growth principles and the outer boundary sequencing and growth principles, we have those conversations inside the red line as well all of the time, in terms of developers coming to us and saying, right, here are my aspirations, how do we make this work? We have those conversations through Grant's team in planning guidance, but also through Luke's team and Blair around other opportunities in the city. So I don't think that we miss out on these opportunities. I don't think developers are going to not come and have the conversation. If there are financial implications of bringing some of that investment forward, then we will always come back to council to have that conversation. But I think that these all layer up into that affordability and pace and scale and bringing forward supply conversations as well. So we are very much in the middle of that conversation now.
So perhaps, and I appreciate what you said there, Jen, but I just have a concern that we don't really have a big plan. You know, we're relying to some extent on the WHO for a 6-weekly finance meeting to make little decisions along the way, which probably do lead to quite good and successful outcomes. But should we not have, now that we've got this information, a plan that we might change as we move along, but a plan that says, you know, between now and the next LTP, this is where we hope we might be if the population projections go.
Can I just intercede there just a little bit? In point C, it talks about the planning development of the 22-23 annual plan, which is one of those steps along the way. I'm inserting in the motion that I'm going to move and the 23-24. So both years in between now and the next LTP, we have a reset if necessary, we have the ability to have a reset. So
Look, I think that goes some of the way. But I just wonder, having a big plan which we can either put ticks alongside or crosses as we journey through it, might be better than just reviewing it every year and doing a little bit of a jump.
Yeah, look, I think that historically we have, like, the ideal situation here is that we get really great data, that we get it in a timely way, and that it feeds effectively into the LTP. That's the goal. As you well know, there have been a number of things that have got in the way of that process. So I think Dave's solution is a very good one, and this is the particular conversation I will miss having every 6 weeks.
Those are my questions.
We can zoom you in if you like.
That's my questions, thank you.
Thanks. And look, I was just going to insert myself in there with a question of staff, which is partly answered, but can I presume that at the annual plan, or for the annual plan preparation next year, there will be the updated sort of infrastructure need solutions put in front of us if there are new figures that come to light, and then the same in the following year if we have one for the annual plan afterwards, so that we can have the ability to reset things at those two particular points along the way?
Yes.
Good. Okay. It's the best answer yet. Thanks. We've got Councillor Gallagher.
Bear with me, and I acknowledge I keep going on about this, and I just want to know how this work or these calculations relate to the metro So this is Hamilton Urban. I'm looking at the chart on page 59. So the Hamilton Urban is that chart, you know, with the high and low nitty, which you're then basing the AP and the LTP. What calculations is Waikato and Waipa using? And I've always asked for constant visuality of those projections, because obviously all those towns are a part of the Metro commuter for a start. While we don't provide the services, we sure as heck do get the day population that comes in and out of the city.
Right, good question. Those two, as we understand it, meaning Waikato District and Waipa, indicating they're going to move to Nydia High 2021. So that's the same as what we've got in this report. So there'd be alignment there, and that's not by accident. We've had many conversations with Future Proof who want alignment on the view on growth. Second answer to your question, it's another good. In fact, you've raised this before, and I think we've taken your initiative. So Nathan and I, through the analytics program, are extending the growth model from the Hamilton boundaries out to the MSP area. So obviously we have a detailed, pretty sophisticated model for Hamilton because you need one for various reasons. But obviously the boundaries, there's a lot of flow between the boundaries. There's less distinction, and as we have these like macro spatial plans like the MSP, we need a model that can understand those flows, can take into account things that we know are happening in the future, and the data that we have in what we can get off Waipa and Waikato District. So in short, we're building a model that will be across the MSP area, and that will give us actually a whole lot of intelligence that we need.
I mean, I obviously include Morrinsville in that criterion, I think, of course. But I'm just trying to work out, I mean, obviously in terms of our calculations, of course, this figure is really relevant because this is where we, forgive me if I'm wrong, stump up the money, do the advocacy. But in terms of land, if there's as we know, if there's a housing development in Morrinsville, Ngaruawahia, Te Amutu, Cambridge, potentially that has real significance because people, don't, as you've correctly said, so all I'm wanting is sort of a constant ongoing reference to metro spatial and how that may impact on the services we have to provide in terms of the commuters and visitors coming in.
And that's exactly the limitation that the peer review identified on the Nydia projections, is that it doesn't take account of on the ground things that we know about, the new spatial plans, etc. So we're part of this as a response to that peer review. We already knew it, and Councillor McPherson has raised this a number of times, and Councillor Wilson. There are limitations in the dwelling model in particular. So the population we're okay with. That's their wheelhouse. But in the dwelling projections, what they're projecting isn't what we're seeing in our numbers. So, and that's why we're suggesting to council that they allow us to go away and build a model that might do that better.
Right. Thank you. Because obviously, with respect, I'm looking at that 208,000 figure. But the other figure, which will have huge impact, is the other 50 to 100,000 that live in the metro area, but will impact on us.
Yes, those are the things we're going to need to dig into. So we're sort of early stages, but it's really important, those things you've mentioned.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Hamilton.
Chair, just on regard to the dwelling projection model that got flushed out of the peer review, is that going to dig into starting to help us understand typology?
Yes.
Yep. Cool. So that will go some way to this blunt approach we've got in terms of infill and greenfield. It'll start to go what
attached
are
or
the
detached.
Yeah, that's going to be really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Ewan, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Dave. Thanks, gentlemen. My question is just in regards to a couple of submissions we had during the LTP who were questioning our some of our data, and that's what triggered this need for a peer review. Having now reflected on the peer review, help me understand, were they right or were they mistaken?
Essentially, I mean, there's two key aspects of growth projections that the council wants and needs to do its planning. One's population. Nydia, that's their wheelhouse. They are demographers, they're specialist demographers, and the peer review effectively said population-wise, it's very close to Statistics New Zealand, which they used as the benchmark, compared it to data including the 2018 census. So they're pretty satisfied with population, and you'd expect that, that's their expertise. Then they take that population and they convert it into households, dwellings, and that is where the limitation is, or that's where the peer reviews identify that there is a shortcoming there. And it's because they're effectively using population and assumptions to get houses, but there's many things that happen on the ground, and there are things that we understand and we're planning and we're privy to that means that we can be well more informed than that. So essentially the population, pretty happy, that was about right, if you want to call it that. Dwelling projections, essentially they're not using all of the information available to them. We think that's a limitation. So if you want to call that, got it wrong. And our answer to that is, let's use the skill sets we have and the information to go away and do something better. Does that answer the question or not quite?
No, it does. And my only other question is, you're going to do that, and that's why you're suggesting that we wait and use the new information as part of the next annual plan.
Yeah, so firstly we're recommending not doing it now for risks that have been identified if you change a fundamental assumption of your LTP at this stage. And secondly, yeah, we're trying to look for how can we get the best projections, the most accurate and useful projections for the next LTP. And we've looked at our options. We don't see anyone else providing them in the way that we want. They don't have the information that we do. We've got an analytics team who are neck deep in this, so we're suggesting, we're saying, putting our hands up and saying, well, we think we can do a better job.
And I'll probably add that we will be doing that in partnership with consultancy firms to build this and peer review it. So, yeah.
And just help me understand the time frame. When do you feel you'll be able to give us the data that will help us in our decision making?
So we've stated in the report at the November 2021 briefing. So we should have some numbers by then.
Yeah.
What was the date? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
In the report, we've stated November.
Yeah.
So at a briefing in November.
For the annual
Yes.
plan, pre-deliberation sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. You're right?
Yeah.
Mayor Paula, thanks.
Questions got asked, but just in terms of our ability to, it's good that we're taking this slightly increased projection. Our ability to pull back how agile are we in that whole? Because if we plan for Nydia High, it is obviously a lot more money to commit to future infrastructure, etc., to meet the need. How agile are we in terms of that? We don't want to have a just-in-time necessarily philosophy, but we don't also want to invest millions of dollars of ratepayer money well ahead of a need that may change.
I'll take that, Mayor Paula.
Okay.
So relatively agile is the answer to your question. I think that, in terms of speeding things up, it's easier to, I was going to say it's easier to start things than it is to stop things. Once you've committed to things like a bridge or investing in a certain piece of kit, we're not going to completely stop that unless there was a black swan event, right?
Yeah.
But we have the cycles that you know about, the LTP cycle, the annual plan cycle, and the 6 weekly finance committee meeting cycle that enables us to make decisions that we need to within those different timeframes to either bring investment forward or stretch investment out if we don't need it. So pretty flexible.
Cool.
Okay, thanks. There's no other speakers, so we move to the recommendation, which we'll get up on the wall. I've added it, I'm going to move it, and I've added in a second annual plan to point C about when the dwelling projection models information gets used, so each of the next 2 annual plans, and then obviously in LTP and so forth afterwards. Ryan, you can second that? Yep, that's seconded by Ryan. There it is up on the wall. Yep. So, look, a good close colleague of mine, Councillor Blind Freddie, has said we should be earmarking for greater infrastructure spend in anticipation of the growth that we know is coming up in the lift. But Blind Freddie is sometimes a bit impetuous, so I'm happy with this, at this point, with this suggestion that we look at what tweaks or changes we need next year with the figures and information we're going to get from this dwelling projection model, which I think is much more relevant to what's happening on the ground in Hamilton than a lot of what we've seen come from outside sources. And also the following year, because I think it might take a while to bed in what impact those dwelling projections might have on terms of infrastructure and the costs associated with that, and whether we need to do them straight away or which year they should be brought forward to, those sorts of issues. So I'm reasonably comfortable with this proposal because it doesn't leave us waiting for 3 years seeing opportunities missed. So I think that's really important, that we have to be more nimble than we have been, and I think this will, for now, will do the job, and hopefully by the time of the next LTP we'll have much more accurate information going forward, but we're always going to have other opportunities that come up as well that might drive things, so we may always have to be prepared to tweak our work in this area, to tweak our proposed expenditure and so forth as we go between LTPs when we're in a growth phase like this. So that's my input. I've got Councillor Wilson next. Oh, sorry, I just want to, Rob, do you want to speak before you go?
I don't have to go for another hour. So.
Oh, okay, sorry, I got it wrong. Yep. Ewan.
Yeah.
You over, Wilson. Suggesting that should be a target.
Yeah, don't take that as an invite.
Thanks, Chair Dave. Look, as a council and as a governance group, our decision making is only as good as the raw data which we base our decisions on. And I accept at times there's not an exact science, and that not all information will be as accurate as in an ideal world and with hindsight we would like it to be. But I am pleased that as a result of this peer review, we've identified areas where we could improve. And a world-class, high-performing organisation is one that constantly reflects, constantly asks whether or not the basis of which we make our decisions are right. And so I welcome the thought that staff are going to use their own expertise and provide more clarity into the number of dwellings, because we all accept that that is a critical component in determining how, when, and the quantum this council allocates to resources that enables the infrastructure to enable those dwellings. So I'm really pleased that we got support around the table for the peer review. I think the peer review highlights an area we need to improve. It's not a criticism, that's a realisation, and I look forward to getting the latest information that will help us have really good information come the annual plan.
Thank you. Councillor Ryan.
Chair. Yeah, just to acknowledge Councillor Wilson, and I think it was him that insisted on a peer review, and I think that was a good outcome. So just acknowledge that, but also the fact that this has flushed out the need to identify the number of dwellings and the types of dwellings. This was something I was asking for 9 months ago, but I guess we'll get there eventually. This sort of information will give us really key data to make really informed decisions. And I think it'll actually help our development community because it'll provide market intelligence into the types of communities they need to build. So I think it's a really, really good outcome. And I think other councils will be looking to copy that.
Thanks. Councillor Martin.
Yes, obviously totally support the consequent motion and recommendations. As I've said, and I will keep on saying, please forgive me, absolutely parallel to this, I look forward to boundaryless planning, says I, with a degree of
regret?
A degree of perverse humour. But I do want to, obviously, so what's, because when people make renting decisions even, when people make job decisions, they make house purchase decisions, they're not necessarily worried about the colour, which rate bill they get. But obviously, all that's happening in the metro, so it seems to me that we constantly want to be running our analysis around urban Hamilton, which is we do, and then metro spatial Hamilton, including Morrinsville, because all of that, even the households, the types of developments have significant, obviously, impact, because people will not be saying, do we live in Hamilton or Tiamutu or Cambridge? People will be driven by a whole range of factors as to where they locate. And having said that, if we're taking the metro spatial thing, the impact of that development in Metro Hamilton has huge impact on the bits that we actually have to raise rates for and finance for. So I think this is a good step in the right direction, and I'm really looking forward to being the joined at the hip information and data that we'll get from our colleague councils as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Jeff, Deputy Mayor Jeff.
Very quickly, look, I agree it's a good outcome, although I find myself feeling just quietly a little apprehensive about what figures we might get in November ahead of the next annual plan. Look, it's great to have as much info as possible, and to me it's definitely no reflection on staff. It's just good to have as much as you can, and I acknowledge Dave's role in being incredibly annoying for a long period of time and continually pushing like a broken record for Nydia High to be...
It was Councillor Blind Freddie, not me.
Acknowledged, but what I'm seeing out of this was that our population predictions were fine, but there was a bit more nuance which we're going to be able to apply to it. So yeah, very good outcome, and the peer review, it's just good practice, isn't it? For something as important as this to get as much info as possible. I remember my first year on council, I think we were coming in 2016 after there had been growth had got ahead and we'd fallen behind, and suddenly the first thing we had to do was come up with a 10% rate rise to catch up. So look, I just feel we've really got our eyes on the ball a lot better now. So yeah, good stuff.
Thanks. Councillor Robb.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And look, I acknowledge the work that's been done in this and hope that we can continue to keep those figures up to date and alive. I think having oversight on our population changes, as well as the car movements in and out of the city each day, because I think that's also a predictor of who's living in Morrinsville but working in the city, or living or loving in the city, or whatever they do on a daily basis, are important indicators not only for us but also for business and the need for what amenities we need in the city. If we don't do it, or we get it significantly wrong, we can either underinvest or overinvest in the city. And we've had an example of overinvesting years ahead of the time that it was actually needed in the past, with the consequent cost of that funding on our existing ratepayers. And, you know, those decisions are not minor decisions. We're not just dealing with petty cash. There are significant amounts of investment required in order to fund the type of growth that we've been talking about in the earlier report, in the Chair's report. And so it's very, very important that we have a good build of stats behind us so that we can make those informed decisions in a timely manner. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, councillors, there's no other speakers. We'll move to... Oh.
Sorry, I thought Blind Freddie was up there for a moment.
No.
Can't see him.
That's right. Sight impaired, Freddie, thank you. Okay, we'll take a show of hands on this. Those in favour of the resolution? Yep, that's unanimous, thank you. Okay, councillors, let's break for a quarter of an hour and come back at 20 past. Thanks, and we're back on item 7 and 8. We have a quorum in the room that's being a bit talkative, so if you'll all shut up and we can get on with things. Yeah.
From a
Chairperson, thank you. Okay, we're on to the Ruakura and East program update, and Tilly and Jen are going to do that. Tilly, are you leading off, or?
Tilly and Karen.
Karen.
Oh, okay. Tilly. Hi, Tilly.
Tilly and Luke.
Yeah,
There you go.
she's been landed in it. Luke's jumped in to provide moral support.
Thanks, Luke, really.
So, who's Tilly? Are you? Yep.
Cool.
Thanks.
Kia ora councillors, my name is Tilly Mercod and I joined council 14 weeks ago as the program manager of Ruakura and East and Rotokauri North West. I'm proud to be a Hamiltonian and I was previously working at ACC as a regional team manager in the business arm of ACC, looking after a team of account and relationship managers across the central North Island. Prior to that, I was leading a finance team at Fonterra, but I'm really excited to be here and in this role. I have a real passion for people and making a difference. Ruakura is one of the most important localities in the Hamilton-Waikato Metropolitan Spatial Plan, especially in the Hamilton area specifically. It is a core part of the transport concept in the Hamilton-Waikato Metro Spatial Plan, and the future of Ruakura is a core focus in the context of the District Plan program. As part of the work streams contained in Future-Proof, the Update Future-Proof strategy we'll be examining how best to translate the Hamilton-Waikato Metro Spatial Plan strategy for Ruakura as part of the Future-Proof strategy, and it will also be a core focus within the Waikato Metro Spatial Plan program business case. At our next meeting, we will have more updates and collateral that build on these aspects that are mentioned generally in the report today. As a result of Ruakura's importance and to ensure that people and the community are at the heart of its development, a program approach is being applied to the growth cell. A program approach ensures that all activities and projects within the area are captured and planned for under one program umbrella, and that we work with stakeholders, partners, and the community to make this happen. This approach builds upon the model used for Peacock and will take the learnings from that program into this new program. On that basis, we take the report as read, and there are no resolutions from this report. The report includes workstream updates from planning and land use, development and consents, network infrastructure, parks and open spaces, and an update from Tainui Group Holdings regarding progress on the Ruakura Super Hub, along with an outline of what we're focusing on in the next 6 months. Are there any questions?
Yes, there are. Councillor Bunting.
Good morning. Welcome, Tilly.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have just a couple of questions and probably a little bit about the detail. Point on page 26, point Romans 7, about the completion of the road, the expressway basically, where it links up to Hamilton. Now, we've got the date there that upgrade is to be substantially complete by the end of 2021. Yet on point 53, further into the report, they say the completion date is April 22. Can you please give me a really clear assurance of when that expressway off-ramp is due to be completed? Because I know it's very rushed. But
Yes, let me just grab confirmation from Chris Barden.
So we are.
Great.
Yeah, sorry. Kia ora, councillors. So the connection which Hamilton City is building from the university area out to the expressway, we are anticipating construction completion of that early next year. So it's around March, April next year is when that component is due to be completed. We're also still trying to understand the completion timeframes of the expressway and get confirmation and clarity from Waka Kotahi NZTA around that as well.
So is it still likely there may be a lag between when the expressway opens and when that expressway's...
Yeah, that's something that we're working through. We are very close at the moment in terms of, and obviously the construction of the section which we're responsible for building, we're underway with that and moving as fast as we can.
Great, thank you. No, that's good to know. Okay, cool. And
Sorry, can I just follow that, Bunty? The expressway itself is still slated to be finished in December this year.
Yep, yeah, that is right.
So we're going to have an expressway without a connection there for 4 or 5 months, maybe.
Yeah, so we're trying to align that with Waka Kotahi at the moment, and I understand there's a briefing coming up to elected members around in mid-June in terms of that alignment of those respective programs as well to give some further clarity around that.
Okay, maybe we should, I'd probably like a minute note that this issue has been highlighted about the completion date there. Staff might need to have a think about how we can ensure alignment, not just hope for alignment, I guess.
Yeah. It is a big concern, but
thanks.
Yep, so...
And I know you're going as fast as you can, but it is...
Sorry, Bunty, keep going, thanks.
Thank you. No, that's good. I appreciate that, Dave. My second question is on page 39, just looking at the lovely map there and the cool colours.
What page?
39.
Thank you.
There's a part there where Fairview Downs, right up to Wairere Drive is industrial. Now, there was talk at some point that potentially could become housing instead of industrial. Is that still on the cards? Do we know?
Luke?
You know the block I'm talking about there? The Fairview.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I just want to point, are you talking about this area of land through here?
No, just below where it joins up with, just go left.
Here?
There.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's correct. So that's the tramway block. That's
thank you.
That's the tramway block. So for elected members, just so you all know that, just if I'm this box of industrial land, that's the tramway block that was signalled for land use change in the Hamilton Waikato Metro Spatial Plan, and it's also part of the scope of the district plan review work that council has signed off, and we're exploring how to deliver that through that program.
So next time we see the map, the bit that's got INDUS on it would likely be purple rather than slate or whatever colour that is.
Look, I think that as I understand, that map is showing what it is today, and until such time as the council have made decisions to change it, will reflect it at that time. But it's certainly the intention in the spatial plans there. That's a core aspect of delivering on iwi aspiration. It's tied to the some expanding some of the industrial activities on the east side of the expressway on land owned by Tainui Group Holdings. And as I said, it's in the scope that council approved for the district plan.
Great, thank you. Regards now the Greenhill Park and the Webb development, they've done a wonderful job of undergrounding those massive transpower lines. Is that the intention further south with this, or are they going to be overhead? Real detailed questions, I know. Sorry, but
again, if you
will make a difference to what we do.
No.
Look, so what I do know is for some aspects of the transpower lines, they need to be underground where the inland port is. So those are actually preconditions imposed by the Ruakura Board of Inquiry back in 2014 to enable the full port development to go ahead. So there is definitely some parts of the transpower transmission corridor will be underground, certainly in the south. Other than that, there are no other plans at this point for it to be undergrounded.
Okay, cool. And last detailed question, I appreciate your indulgence, is what was formerly known as a spine road, but now the Eastern Arterial Multimodal Transport.
Eastern Transport Corridor.
Thank you. That's today. Tomorrow will be something different. But where is that due to link up with Gordonton Road now? Where's the thinking on that?
Yeah, I'll pass that one over to Chris Allen.
So I think your question, councillor, is page 38 is probably the best map to look at.
Yeah, just sort of.
And
an
we've
arrow.
shown the Eastern Transport Corridor, which has previously only shown in jurisdiction to Hamilton City up to Green Hill Road.
Yep.
We've popped onto this map the outer district R2 growth area and showing the concept that we think that transport corridor should progress north to south through that growth area. You'll see the little arrow at the top. That's to indicate we're going to link it somewhere. We just don't know where yet until we've done the work.
Okay.
So I think that's the work ahead of us in terms of over the next year in terms of the Eastern Transport Corridor, bringing it right back to a land use conversation and what everyone wants to do. What's the form and function of the Eastern Transport Corridor? How does it fit with the Metro Spatial Plan and our multimodal world we live in now? And how do we strategically plan it through an area that's out of our district, but where would we most likely want to connect it to, whether it's Thomas Road, Gordonton Road, Borman Road, still ahead of us.
So we don't know yet.
We don't know yet, but we'll be looking at that with you over the next 12 months.
Okay.
But it'd be fair to say it's going to be either Thomas Road or Borman Road. The only two possibilities that make sense.
There are some challenges, I think, with elevation and how we tie them together, but that's the work that we'll look at with you over the next 12 months.
No, that's great. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Just on that point that Bunty's raised about that particular transport connection through R2, it would be good to, when we have Ruakura reports, that we always show that, because Ruakura doesn't work, and especially not that connection, in isolation. It's got to work with R2 and the connections to the north-east.
That's principally why we've developed this drawing on page 38 as the base drawing, so we can bring in R2 and talk about it as a Ruakura and east sort of Hamilton growth zone, and that'll take account of what happens on the other side of the expressway as you move through all of the planning processes as well.
Thanks. Have you finished, Mark? Yeah, thanks. Sarah, thanks.
Chair, my question is around the natural areas that have been allocated here. So we've got, in our district plan, we've got a target that 10% of the city's land mass is, I guess, native habitat, and in our Nature in the City strategy, that also now requires, or it's set a target of a minimum of 10%. Here, we have 10% green space, but that will include parks and things. So those only a portion of that will contribute to that native habitat cover. So, firstly, I'd be really interested to understand how much of this will actually contribute to biodiversity, or that 10% target. And you might need to go back and have a look at that, Tilly. And I wonder whether we could have that be a regular part of this report, that how we're going against that target.
Yeah. There's certainly been conversations starting to happen around that, and as part of the Ruakura area for the Nature in the City strategy, the work happening in the Manganoa Gully erosion control works, and there's also been some landscaping and things done around those transport connections. If Chris is happy to kind of talk to a little bit more about that, but I can certainly in future reports capture that detail and kind of put a focus on it.
Councillor Sarah, I think we can take an action point to have a conversation with the Parks team about how that will get, I was going to say visualised, but I don't want to solve this problem for them, how that will get reported back across both growth areas, but if we're talking about intensification or other areas as well, how each of these growth areas is going to impact on that outcome. So I imagine that team have got some kind of monitoring or measurement happening, but making sure that we take an organisational and citywide approach to sharing that information, and that comes through strongly in all of our programs. We'll take that back to them.
Okay, thank you. And that could potentially be something that's then reported back through the Environment Committee in terms of that organisational wider city approach.
Yeah, maybe as a whole of city
Yeah.
element, but I take your point that you'd like to see that reflected in each of these programs as well.
Yes, yeah, that would be excellent.
Because if you look at the map on page 39, you're certainly not achieving 10%. Blind Frida can see you're not nowhere near 10%, more like about 2 or 3% of green in there. Eh?
Mezzanine.
Like a mezzanine.
Mezzanine?
Yeah.
Oh,
Mezzanine
2
like
level.
a forest.
Oh, okay. So people are going to live in
build
caves.
tree houses. Okay, thank you. And the other question was just around getting the right amount of residential density to connect in with key transport corridors so that we're really getting good density around strategic transport corridors. So how will that kind of be reflected in terms of reporting or for future work we need to do around this?
Through you again, Chairman McPherson. So primarily the starting point for the density is to achieve, you know, the motive aspirations of council and to build the types of communities that we've heard this council is interested in will be through the district plan committee work. It's Ruakura is its own project within the overall program, and we'll be working very closely with Tono Group Holdings on that, and that'll be the subject of briefings to the DP committee when there's some certainty around what that's starting to look like. The link-in will be through reporting, through strategic growth, and then equally through the other mechanisms that we report to full council.
Okay, thank you. And will that potential swap, where you're looking at swapping industrial for residential, also be part of that district plan?
Yeah, so at the moment, the council's resolved that where there are opportunities to look at land use through the district plan program for land currently outside the boundary, if those opportunities present themselves, then we certainly will include that. At the moment, we're not quite sure around the mechanisms that will be used to fully enable Ruakura with respect to the land of the east. It's the subject of further investigations. We just don't have certainty on that matter at this point.
Okay, but that will come through that review committee.
Totally, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Martin.
Through the Chair, Councillor Sarah, we may want to at least make a minute note of that discussion so there's a clear action that it comes to the discussion environment committee in terms of where does that monitoring fit in. So I'm wondering if we could just make sure that's a minute note for staff to follow up. Can you just clarify? I'm going back to page 39, and I know that Councillor Bunty questioned this. So if I've got this right, the area north of Powell's Road, bounded by the expressway, that's a potential change to residential, is that correct?
So, Councillor Gallagher, I just want to be clear that this area of land that elected members can see, this block here was the area that Councillor Bunting referred to. That's the tramway block. I think you're referring to this purple area of land that says large lot
what
residential.
I'm trying to get a feel of, if you blow it up, it's Powell's Road. So what I want to do is, I'm making because you're looking at the indicative super hub indicative area, and you've got the dotted lines, right? The red dotted lines.
Yep.
Then north of the red dotted lines, north of Powell's Road, there's a block in there. Which do I assume that there could be very proactive? There is going to be proactive discussion.
The wetland between the expressway and the Spine Road at the north end. From Powell's Road north.
Yeah. So there's no, at this stage, there's been some broad conversations that have been conveyed to me by those landowners thinking about other land uses, but it's gone relatively cold around changing it from industrial because of the strength of the industrial land market and the desire of those landowners to still maintain some industrial land. So all of those land use arrangements will be looked at through as part of the DP work as well. But there's certainly nothing that I'm aware of right now from landowners in that area seeking active rezonings.
So do we have any aspirations, or we call it just comes another Te Rapa?
Well, the aspirations in there are for industrial land, that there's a certain amount of industrial land that was determined by the Board of Inquiry that's needed to support the port.
Yeah.
So if that industrial land is lost to residential, it needs to be thought of in the context of, is there still enough industrial land to support the activities of the future port, and are there other localities for where that industrial land could be located? And those are being investigated.
I'm not sure if I'm on the same page, but I'm going back to the dotted line, and I'm jumping now I'm flying across the expressway to the area that is indicated across the expressway for future potential development.
Here?
Correct.
Yep. So that area of land in the Hamilton Waikato Metro Spatial Plan is indicated as an opportunity for further industrial land.
So my argument would be the dotted line should go to the railway line as a natural physical barrier. If I had my way, but obviously I don't, I'd take it all across to, I'd certainly be aware of the stuff across at 26. So if you see what I'm getting at, I'm looking at that particular block of land. This is very high level. I'm looking at our natural the natural contiguous residential, and so I'm, of course, and I have no idea of the soil types and the micro detail of that area, but one would have thought that the Ruakura Super Hub indicative area jumping across the expressway for industrial there's a degree of logic, I would have assumed.
There is, and that's why it's in the Hamilton Waikato Metro Spatial Plan, exactly for the logic that you've outlined. I think the exact location of those boundaries are matters to probably be determined through the HUG's work, and to the extent that it identifies not just this locality but other localities that are currently sitting outside of the boundary. If there's something material out of that has an impact on this program, then that's a way that it flows in that to make sure that the Ruakura program picks up on that direction.
So HUGs will capture my question?
My view is that it will, yes, because one of the things that HUGs will be looking at is not just arrangements within the city boundary, but opportunities for further urban development and the form of the city over the long term outside of the current political boundaries.
Yeah. So all I'm wanting to know is, where does the conversation, and I'll just use as an example, north of Powers Road, which is designated to be the Te Rapa, which there's potential, I'll leave it at that, for residential versus industrial. Where are we going to have that kind of conversation? I realise there's issue of landowners, there's due process and all of that, but one would assume that we may or may not have some aspirations.
That's true, and my view on that is that the best place for those discussions is in the work that you'll be doing through the HUG's review.
Okay, could just right. Thank
you. I was going to follow up. That was also an area I was asking about, the same area as Martin, and what I want to know is where it describes in the legend the Ruakura Super Hub indicative area, or AIA, I think it means area, on page 39 there. Shouldn't that read TGH Super Hub indicative area, because the land it encompasses is all owned or under control of TGH?
That's correct, yeah.
So, because if it was a general growth cell indicative area, you would have included the bit that Martin was talking about, because that you in fact said the Board of Inquiry had assumed that much industrial land to support the logistics hub. So surely, it's not showing. Martin's quite correctly pointed out it's not showing here as part of the super hub, and that's because it's owned by Webb rather than TGH.
It's Webb and a couple of there are, I think, two other landowners that are in there. I think that East Side Apostolic Church has got some land, and there's one other private landowner in there. But certainly the dotted land is owned by Tono Group Holdings.
Yeah, because that puts slightly different light on it to me. If it's only where the super hub is just TGH is a name for its bit of land. They don't really give a rat's about anyone else's industrial land as long as they get theirs. That's sort of what I'm taking out of this. If it's really needed as industrial land to support the super hub, our maps should show that it's all part of that, to me. Because there is a question, if you look at the Greenhill Park subdivision, that's gone so well in terms of selling quickly in that, there's a huge pressure, I would have thought, from the public, if not from the landowners, that more of that is residential. There's not much left in the current city area to go into residential. Surely they're going to be pressing for that area north of Powell's Road, some or all of that, to come in as residential.
Well, look, I know that for some land there in there that is zoned industrial, even just this week we had inquiries from people coming in having pre-applications for looking at industrial development in that land. There's equally a very intense market looking for land for industrial development. The benefit of the industrial zone land at that location is that the quantum was identified by the board that it was needed to help support the port. The difference being that land, it's freehold, so the ability for it to come to market and to find people who are prepared to invest and build there is different.
But we go back to Martin's point, what are our ambitions? What's the best urban form in terms of the well-beings for the people who live there? Is it best to have a chunk of light industrial and logistic stuff immediately behind people's houses along that spine road, for instance?
Look, it's a good question, and if it's one that the council wants to revisit, I suggest that it's part of the conversations that you have in HUGs, and then any directions that come out of that can flow into the program, and equally as part of the DP program.
So where's Martin's question, I'm not sure was satisfactory answer, where's the home for that discussion? It's because HUGs is a general citywide policy thing. We haven't got into specific urban form and different suburbs, I didn't think.
No, but I think my view is a logical consequence. If there's a desire to change land use arrangements and reduce the amount of industrial land, it's very difficult then to find other substitutable localities, and that leads to a broader question of where other industrial land may be able to be located. Depending on what those results are, it then comes back to the district plan committee, because that's where the zoning and district plan questions are made, and then it flows back into this depending on what comes out of those two discussions.
We've been sort of driven by a 10-year-old or 13-year-old Board of Inquiry sort of decision in a way, and 10, 12-year-old thinking on the part of TGH. They've bitten the bullet since then and said, look, the tramway block is really better suited to residential, and we've got an alternative across the expressway. Surely the same argument could easily be applied to this area that Martin raised. I don't know what you're going to call it, Powell's North.
Yeah, look, Councillor McPherson, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying you're asking what's the vehicle like to have those discussions, and I think that there's two places for those, and one is in the HUGs discussion, and another one is in Councillor Ryan's committee. One, because the HUGs work will ultimately look at the future urban form of Hamilton and where growth may occur in areas outside of the existing boundary. If there's opportunities for changes to occur inside the boundary that aren't contingent on a change in HUGs, then that's the vehicle is through Ryan's committee, not through the reports that Tilly's bringing up.
Well, maybe the final point I make on that bit is that along Te Rapa, by way of example, there's a buffer zone between the commercial industrial area and the housing area, and where there's no road to provide that, there's literally a nature strip of sorts, anywhere from 20 metres to 80 metres wide, I think, in some points. That's not nothing like that is showing. It's showing housing right up against industrial potentially here in some parts, including the Powell's North area. So where's that should at least be, we should be demanding that as a matter of principle.
So it's all in there. So just be very clear, this is not a zoning map, and it doesn't show the planning control. So all of those matters around the interfaces between industrial land and separations and buffers and lighting controls and setbacks and landscaping, visual screenings, All of those were matters that were examined for 6 to 7 weeks, and they're in the planning controls that sit currently in the district plan, where you've got land that's residentially zoned, where it's sharing a boundary with an industrial zone in the Ruakura area.
Okay, so we need to settle the sort of urban form issues and pass off whatever outcomes to the district plan committee to make sure that the zones are drawn correctly to take account of whatever.
That's correct.
Is the final answer there.
So this is showing broadly land use. It doesn't show. It's not the zones and the controls and all of those amenity considerations that were front and centre of the board's thinking and what it heard through literally hundreds of hours of submissions from existing and future residents that were worried about those matters.
Yeah. I've got another question in relation to the large lot residential area on either side of Morrinsville Road, which is currently State Highway 26. That's going to be revoked, I see in another map, right down the bottom there with the gullies on two sides. I understand that, by the way, the Percival Road block, that's already there. The houses are there and completely taken up by a large lot, and it's a bit like a mini Tamaheri, extremely hard to unpick. But what about, there's some farming land in that bit down the bottom. Why are we arguing or saying it's going to be all large lot residential when that's not something we particularly want in the city, if we can help it?
Yeah, so once again, it's not, it's just reflective of what's there now. Ruakura, that's part of what's in the work of the DP program to look at that. A lot of that land equally that came into the city from Waikato District, and a lot of it has and was subdivided into large lots, not to the same extent and the same density, but there is I would say the majority of it is kind of country living, rural residential type housing in that area.
Could we have at some stage a bit of, via aerial mapping or something, a bit of an analysis of are there bits suitable for more normal housing, not Tamaheri style?
Yeah, absolutely we can, and we can bring that to you, and it's either, I'm just wondering whether or not do you want to bring it through this work, probably through
as long as it doesn't.
Councillor Ryan's.
One of the things that happens is people get wind of that sort of discussion and start creating more large lots. How do we stop things getting worse in the meantime while Ryan does his 18-month thing on the district plan?
It's less than 18 months.
And you're saying that's quick?
So yes, I think there's a whole session just on Ruakura in that committee, which we can brief for elected members. So that for me, there's a couple of questions in here that I can take and bring to that committee.
Just if I can, councillors, I still think that while some of these matters may go to other committees, the program approach that Tilly is running for Ruakura here, I think we want to make sure that all this is coming back through the reports and information here. So in support of what Luke's saying, the District Plan Committee may consider that, but I think the program approach here is about giving one overall view of Ruakura and all the matters you're raising. I think that's really, really important in terms of how we think about this. So I think, Tilly, Luke, we need to make sure we just land all that back in comprehensive updates through here.
Maybe it's a sort of a sub-principle of mugs or hugs that we don't do anything to encourage further large lot subdivision in or around the city. It's sort of an implied principle at the moment, but we maybe ought to be stating that so that we don't get subdividers in the SL1 area wanting to set up parts of it as large lot subdivision. Yep. We say that's one of our principles. You just don't do that in the urban area.
Yes, I would not disagree with you on that. I think that's exactly the approach we've taken on R2 and HT1.
Okay.
And it's largely been able to restrict the amount of subdivision at smaller scales to enable it to be urbanised at a future date.
Right. Well, we're coming to that next anyway, so we can jump on that. Sorry, Martin has another question.
Just so I'm clear, okay, the earlier items that Sarah raised will be, staff will be directing towards the Environment Committee for a broad discussion about principles, and then obviously we then look at where you measure and monitor that stuff. The aspirations we may or may not have north of Powers Road, including an update of TGH intentions of land immediately south of Powers Road, I take it there'll be a minute note that we get a conversation of that high level in the HUGs, in the urban growth working group. Is that, we got right?
Yeah,
So
and just noting...
I just want to capture and making sure that we've got the...
Yeah, and then noting that the feedback loop is in here to make sure that it keeps coming back reported through years, because the program approach, as Tilly has indicated, it's got lots of benefits modelled on what's been happening in Peacock.
And because obviously one is, of course, interested in the concrete aspirations of TGH in terms of south of Powers Road versus the other landowners north of Powers Road, because, you know, there's some interesting issues of, you know, having a consistent approach. But if you're telling me that's at HUGs, I'm happy and delighted.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Councillor Kesh has got a question on Zoom.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. When talked about the close relationship that the Enderley community has with Ruakura. So I'm just trying to work out Ruakura and East program. Is there any sort of mechanism or way that whatever's happening in Enderley feeds into or is considered in this program?
Do you want to, hi Keisha, it's Jen here. Look, I think it's definitely a consideration in terms of understanding the broader environment in which Ruakura sits. There are a couple of places where the Enderley conversation will come to life for you. One is through the district plan conversation and the district plan committee, and the other one is via the housing strategy. So within the housing strategy, you'll recall there was a resolution at I think it was at the last time it came to council to do a community. I want to call it a community plan, but I'm going to. Is it the wrong thing? Luke's going to
Update on
an update on
update on progress and how it's being delivered every 6 months.
Okay, cool. All right. So an Enderley update every 6 months from a housing strategy perspective. Look, I think it is a key focus area, a key focus location for a lot of people around here at the moment. So weaving it in wherever we can will be important, but it's not something that will get reported through this particular program report.
Got you. I don't know if this is the right place to ask, but in terms of that update that you're talking about, where in all of this will there be an opportunity for elected member involvement in terms of what's happening in Enderley and keeping not tabs on it, but having input into other stakeholders and just the wider picture of what's going on?
So there was you may recall there was a elected member working group that were very close to the creation of that housing strategy. So my expectation is that those people, when there is working group requirements, will be called together to be part of that, but it will be reported back through council every 6 months.
Perfect. Thank you, Jen.
Okay, you're right there, Kesh. Thanks. Okay, councillors, we'll just go back to the staff recommendation, which is, sorry? Oh, sorry, Ollie, you've got the blue hand up too. Your turn.
Thanks, Chair Dave. Just further to Kesha's line of questioning, Jen, is there, I understand everything that's been said about the working group for housing strategy in Enderley. Is there, on a member of staff, is there one person who is completely across or owning what's happening in Enderley as part of the actions of that strategy?
Yes, there is. It's Ben Scott.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Councillors, I'll move that the committee receives the report, seconded by Ryan. Any discussion on that? If not, just show of hands. Thanks. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thanks. Thanks very much. Now we're on to the item 8, the MUGS report, which used to be called the HUGS report. Oh, I don't know. It's gaining. It took Blind Freddie a while to get noticed. I thought that was your nickname, Ewan.
I thought Blind Freddie showed a level of self-awareness over this that was quite impressive earlier today.
Okay, Hannah, are you leading off?
I am. Here comes Karen, actually. I'll just wait for her. Yeah.
Well, don't walk past, Karen. You're needed up the front table here.
Oh, geez, I didn't expect that to move so fast.
Okay, the floor's yours.
Thank you, Councillor Dave. So, kia ora koutou. So at the last Strategic Growth Committee meeting in March, you councillors approved the scope for the Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy, as well as requested to seek more information about costs and the principles, which we agreed to deliver as an early deliverable. So since that meeting, we've been working on setting the project up for success. And before I just do a brief outline of the principles, I'll just introduce Stafford Hodgson, who I'm sure you all know from his work in the DC team. Stafford's come into the growth programs team and will be project managing the HUGS project for the next 12 to 18 months. So welcome, Stafford. And he'll probably take over from me in terms of sitting in this seat and providing updates going forward. So in terms of the principles, so we discussed the need to have principles in place for dealing with the unplanned, out of sequence and out of boundary requests. And I'm sure you all are well aware of there's a huge amount of requests happening at the moment. A lot of pressure from developers in terms of these requests. So having them in place is really going to help us all respond to those in a considered manner. So we met since the last meeting with the HUGS Councillor Working Group, which is a great name for a working group. The feedback was, is it Councillor HUGS Working Group or the HUGS Councillor Working Group? And
people
so,
on HUGS are mugs.
Yeah, mugs. And the feedback, so the principles that Hannah has largely led in pulling together with a lot of feedback from a lot of different parts of the organisation and our neighbours, reflects your feedback as well in terms of how we respond to protecting the 15-minute neighbourhood outcomes, the wellbeing outcomes, and linking into Metro Spatial Plan outcomes, etc. And of course the intent to help us all with decision making. So I won't talk any more before I open up for questions, which I hope Hannah can help answer.
Okay. Look, I put myself first on the list just to carry forward a discussion point from the last item, which related to an area of R1, Ruakura, that where an industrial area was immediately adjoining with no major road or anything in between a residential area in the north of Powell's Road there. And so the question about what's a good urban form and considering the well-being, is it good to have factories over your back fence sort of idea. So how, I'm looking at the draft principles, which look really good to me, but and maybe that issue is sort of imply, or answers to it are implied in your principles. I'm not, how would you say, Hannah or Karen, that that problem might be covered off? You know, what would the developers up there need to be aware of in order to make sure that the having industry over your back fence doesn't sort of disrupt your well-being or your community's well-being?
Totally understand, and a really valid point to bring up. I'd say that at the moment it's kind of implied in there. It's not as explicit as we could potentially make it. In terms of creating quality communities, to me that infers, you know, you've got amenity, you've got lifestyle options, you've got, you know, quality places to live, and to me doing something like, you know, the factory over your back fence goes counter to that. So at the moment implied, but we can, these are draft for comment. We've had the one working group with councillors, but more than happy to take feedback on board if we want to be more explicit around some of those things. But at the moment they're not right down into the detail, specifying exactly what needs to be in certain places. It's more of a, this is what we're aiming for overall, holistically good quality communities. And I think that gives us a good point to begin a discussion with developers rather than being prescriptive.
Yeah, so you would say that would be on a list to have a little bit more of a think about.
Yeah.
As to whether it gets worded into here or in somehow other way might be used.
Yeah.
But in terms of the helicopter level principles, it's
Definitely.
it's implied but not specific.
Yeah, and I see that the next step from this is taking these principles and maybe one or two of those proposals that we've had come in the door and actually road test them and see, are we going to get the outcomes that we want using these and applying it to those, or are there some gaps? Should we be more specific in certain areas? So, yeah, once we've kind of got them signed off at this level, I see that's the next step. So,
Thanks. Jeff, thank you.
Yeah, look, I'm looking at the draft principles and they look pretty good to me. On page 50, there's the process for finalising the principles. Can I just ask, how long will it take? How do you see the process from where we are now to the stage where we've adopted the principles, we've worked out exactly what we want to do, and we've kind of prioritised and that, till we sort of get into the physical side of it, where we can actually say, right, you're away, is this a couple of years or?
I think to Hannah's point, so if you consider all of the enormous amount of stuff that's happening in this space at the moment, we've got the district plan review happening, all the waters reform, or like all sorts of stuff happening, as well as the HUGS review in general in terms of what our urban form will look like, etc. So if we consider that might take 18 months or to June next year, we'll mostly be done with the HUGS stuff, I would say, aside from sort of fine-tuning it sort of towards early next year. And so in between that time, road testing those principles and fine-tuning them. So I don't think there's anything stopping us right now in terms of, here are these principles, we're going to test them out with you and actually see if they work.
Good.
And test them so that they're right when the time comes to sort of lock them in. I think that's our approach. And have the growth funding policy as well, which sort of answers some of these questions and is a tool, it's a policy. And so how do we sort of translate these growth principles for these out of boundary, unplanned stuff into something like that, something more formal?
All right. So it's a pretty practical kind of pragmatic sort of process.
I think so. 100%. I mean, I see once we've got kind of, general agreement, we're heading in the right direction, these cover the aspects that we want them to cover.
Yep.
Let's start using them as a communication tool.
Okay. That's
not a
great.
strict evaluation.
So using them after today, if we approve the draft, is the working,
Yeah, cool. And just the other one, I've really warmed up to this HUGS review once I learnt that it's being paid for out of existing budgets. And so point 50, where it says that, so $500,000, how could we do that? It's great that we can, but what's being pushed out or forgotten so that we can do this? Because it's a lot of money to be able to suddenly find.
Yeah, so if you consider the type of work that we need to do for this stuff, remember the term thinking money? So we've put thinking money into the LTP for this type of work. But I think so if you consider the Ruakura business case that we had planned, so we've got budget for that, right? So this is using part of that, and part of this work actually answers that question as well. So that's essentially where it comes from. It's the thinking money that we had there already.
Jeff,
So is
Jeff,
there
I might just add to that.
I was going to say, is there a bit of other thinking money in there that we can move around to do other things too?
To the central city, perhaps. So I think just to add a bit of depth to Karen's comment, that there are pieces of work that were going to happen anyway through things like that business case, through things like the district plan work and things that are happening in Chris's team that were happening anyway that are really relevant to HUGS. So there is that extra $100,000 in there in case we need technical work that is not currently scoped in a different project. So that part of the reason this is good timing for HUGS is because a lot of that work is in train anyway. And if you think about things like the legal review, value capture advice, so that was work that was already in train in terms of really looking at that whole value capture space. So just kind of connecting it into this. And then in that communications and engagement space, Karen has a program that has, she's got multiple programs in her remit, and there's a line that delivers communication and engagement funding. This is about saying, okay, well, we were going to spend, however much money for Peacock or Ruakura or whatever. How do we refine our communications over the next 12 months to make this work? So we've tried quite hard to make this fit in.
Okay, thank you. I'll remember that term, thinking money, for future. And could be useful in the future.
Put it in the minutes so Jeff doesn't forget.
If you'll be pleased to know that there's thinking money in the Central City program budget too.
Great, we've got thinking money there. That's cool.
We've got thinking money. It's pretty cool.
Can I have some of this thinking?
No, don't go getting any ideas, Bunty. Okay.
What is this thinking?
Yeah, and settle down there in the cheap seats. I've got Councillor Ryan, then Mangai Ollie.
Thanks, Chair. I think Blair might have coined thinking money a while ago. Karen and Hannah, thanks for your report. Just help me understand the funding, the budget that we're spending on HUGs. We've got the principles, which kind of gets the ball rolling. Is this about an alignment of the growth funding policy and essentially making this document fit for purpose with current boundary challenges?
100%. The HUGS document as a whole is over 10 years old. We've largely implemented a lot of stuff that was in the original HUGS strategy over that time, and especially in the last few years we've had huge legislative change, huge direction being given to local government about how we should plan and how we should do transport, biodiversity. It's kind of a perfect storm of redoing that strategy to capture all of that and look at our long-term land use, especially with that boundaryless lens that the Metro brought to us. So I'm not sure if that's...
Yeah, no, that's really good. So this is really getting alignment between Metro Spatial Plan, the District Plan Review, HUGs.
And it's almost a more, understandable for the public, for developers, here's our growth plan, this is what we want for the city over the long term, rather than having to read into full technical documents in terms of, zoning provisions. Here's where we're going as a city, and here's how you can help us get there kind of documents.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thanks. Ollie, thanks.
Thanks, Chair Dave. Hey, thanks team for the report and the draft principles. Just referencing point 35, Roman numerals 4, this is on page 49 on Diligent. Create quality communities, not just more houses. I think that's a really good consideration for principles, but I'm not convinced, looking at the draft principles, that the intent of that point has been captured. I see a lot about, urgency to build affordable houses and so on, but where in those principles does it talk about creating communities and develop good urban design principles where people can, can grow a resilient neighbourhood or a resilient community?
Yeah, good points. I mean, we've got quality communities in the overarching kind of statement at the beginning, but more than happy to be more explicit about what that means for you if you don't feel that that's represented through the rest of the principles, if that's the general feeling.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's, sorry, Ollie, it's in line with that first question of mine too, to get some more meat around that in the actual list of things that'll be delivered.
I'll talk more about that in the debate. The second question I've got is, further to Deputy Mayor Jeff's point about the costs for HUGs. I look at the personnel costs and no new FTEs, all done with the existing personnel budgets. My question is the same as, what isn't going to be done to enable this to happen?
What is going to be done?
No, what isn't?
What is not going to be done?
From what I've seen, the program of work at council is extensive, and there's a lot more big projects. Water reform as an example, fast approaching, and I'm almost disbelieving that this project can be done without any new FTEs. It talks about project manager or project owner. Surely we don't have people sitting around with spare capacity that can come in and project manage this. I don't want to be negative, but I just think this is a big project and to do it with an existing resources is a massive ask of staff. Comment?
Ollie, hi, it's Jen, I'll take this one. So similar to the conversation about the budget, that there are significant elements of this work that are happening anyway in other programs that were already kind of underway or likely to roll out this year. To your point about the resources, in fact, I think it was Councillor McPherson that brought that up quite recently around what that looks like, and with Blair's new role and sort of a rejig of his responsibilities, that is something that is being considered right now in terms of what is required in that space. The other thing I was going to say about that was, so the other part of that is that we have seconded a team member into this team to do the project management. So sort of looking to backfill that role as well. So look, it is tight, and you're right, there is an enormous amount of work to do, but we are, moving things around as much as possible to make all of this work. Blair, did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Dana. I think it's a great question Councillor Ollie's asked, or Mungai Ollie's asked, and your answer sums up exactly what I'm thinking about as well. So, look, councillors, I've never seen the level of development inquiry or interest or demand on our team as we're experiencing now. So I am looking at that very hard, and I'll work with the team on just how exactly we make sure we realistically resource that. So we can get the best outcomes for the city.
Thanks. Mark, please.
Thanks, Chair Dave. And it may have been asked while I was out of the room, but I'm on point 36, this 15-minute neighbourhoods. This is the new buzz. We've gone from 20-minute communities to 15-minute neighbourhoods, and I'm not being glib when I say when's the 7.5-minute city coming, because are we going to put a line in the sand and say this is the phrase we use? Because it just, I guess, what's the difference between a 15-minute neighbourhood and a 20-minute community? City, is it? 20 minutes.
Yeah, so we took that direction from our HUGS Councillor Working Group in terms of using that term.
Right.
So we'll take direction from you.
But in tangible terms, is there anything different?
So I think the
Or just-
intent is
Well,
the same.
There will be.
5 minutes, I get, but
Yeah, there will be. I think one of the key parts of this is that, so when we initially talked about the 20-minute city, way back when we were talking about shovel-ready stuff, we acknowledged at that point that at some point Hamilton would need to figure out what that meant in our context. You may remember a conversation with Professor Ian White when he talked about the river, like access to the river being a key part of that from a Hamilton perspective. But I think that whether it's the 20-minute city or the 15-minute neighbourhood, that we will need to have some conversations around what exactly that means in our context and make decisions on that basis. So I think that conversation is yet to happen.
But in the working group, we did talk about examples like for the 15-minute neighbourhood, take Rotatuna North, you've got the shops, the schools, the playgrounds, the houses, the transport network you need within walking distance, the gullies, access to gullies or whatever, within that walking distance or short cycle ride of where you live. And we're made up of a series of interconnected neighbourhoods. Each neighbourhood has their own sort of 15-minute or less, and between them might be 20 minutes, to get from one to the other.
Getting closer to 90 minutes, but
Well, that's if you drive a car.
That speaks to my point. So as a 20-minute city, everything within the city should be within 20 minutes. And a 15-minute neighbourhood means that your neighbourhood needs are within 15 minutes.
So, look, I think I would just repeat what I said before, that actually we need to do this piece of work to understand what this means in a Hamilton context. That actually, otherwise we'll constantly be going, well, what is the difference and which one are we doing? So I think that's a key, it's a key thing to tick off.
So we're saying we're going to deliver 15-minute neighbourhoods and we don't know what they are. I guess that's where I'm heading with this.
No, I think we understand what they are in broad terms, right? But I think from a Hamilton context, we need to define it so that there's no question for you guys.
I guess, the wider intent behind that comment was everything that you need to live a successful and full life is within a locality to you. So we can be more specific around that and tease out what it means for us if that's going to help.
Yeah, because you are going to get that sort of confusion in the community unless we take
I mean, an interesting example, Bunty, might be the WA area, if you know it, out west. It was talked about just for housing, and then they're looking at parks and things and access there. But where's the nearest school? Where's the nearest shops? Can they get there in a reasonable short time?
Yeah,
Probably
and
not.
the 20-minute
actually.
city's been around for 20 years. Everyone knows that old concept. So I'm just wondering if this was different, and are we creating unnecessary confusion? That's all. It's a minor thing that's probably bigger than it needs to be, but I just think we need a bit of clarity on that before we start.
Yeah, Bunty, if you're confused, then we all need to look at it.
No. It doesn't take much to confuse me. Brilliant. Thank you. Okay.
Mayor Paula, thanks.
Yeah, just in that and the ability to service this work, with the 15-minute neighbourhoods out of boundary development, that's not 15-minute neighbourhoods within our own city, that's a cross-boundary conversation. Our ability to manage that within future-proof and other mechanisms that we have, I'm interested in that. And I think Mark makes a really good point that are we talking about just in terms of transport accessibility, or are we talking about the broad scope of creating a livable community? Because if we're doing that, that's a big beast. It's a much bigger beast than someone acquiring land, but putting on some very much needed homes, but not building that sense of community. And so that will be contingent on those other councils, for example, to put in some of those other community infrastructure elements that we've all been talking about, parks, playgrounds, sports fields, etc. But that also means that there has to be some place for people to develop things like doctors, dentists, shops, those kind of things, because we're supposed to be limiting the use of transport to get what you need in your everyday life. That's the whole preface of a 15-minute neighbourhood. So is that's what we're meaning? Or does it mean you can drive anywhere you like within 15 minutes, which is not the right result?
I feel like we might be going around in circles a little bit. I think that this is one of those, that this is the thing that we need to get clear on.
Yeah, so we need to be clear about it, but you haven't really answered the question. It's around how we resource it when it's not in our own boundary. So we do work through future-proof, but there's very little cross-reference. I know what you're saying, though, Ryan. It brings everything into a line. There isn't any actual cross-reference to those other planning mechanisms in here.
Yeah, we've got other principles elsewhere, like boundaryless planning. So, the use of the peak by all the people in Horsham Downs, and the use of facilities just outside the city by people who live inside, gets discussed from time to time. And that, if a developer comes to us and they haven't got something there, but there's something across the boundary, that would be part of addressing the issue, showing how it could work.
I wonder also if you can answer me where it's specifically highlighted whether the priority is infill or new 15-minute suburbs outside of Hamilton. How does that reflect itself in this policy?
So what we're talking about at the moment is just the outer boundary principles. So this is not, what we're talking about now is not kind of an underlying ethos for HUGs. These are just the principles that we will take into a discussion with developers who want to develop, and they are currently outside the Hamilton boundary.
So would there be any reference? It talks about what it includes, but not what it doesn't do. So if it undermines or has a negative impact on development within the city that was planned, it isn't articulated. It's more here that, you wouldn't want.
It's got the statement, Paula, up the top in bold there, must enhance the overall well-being of Hamiltonians. Now, that's pretty high level, but it is meant to address something that doesn't detract from what else is already in Hamilton.
So the other part of this too is that these are in addition to the future-proof principles that are around. So if you're out of the boundary, you have to deal with the future-proof conversation, as well as the things that we want from a Hamilton City perspective. And so I don't know if those are actually in the report, but they have been talked about. And so if you're a developer outside of the city, you have to jump over those hurdles as well as these. And I think, to your point, that the team can certainly share those again, but there are elements in there that talk about the well-functioning urban form, but also delivering to the metro spatial plan and things like that, which address some of your concerns.
Yeah, there is a workshop on the 26th on those
there you
principles.
go.
There is an upcoming workshop on the 26th.
On the 26th of May on the future-proof principles.
Okay, well, yeah, no, I was aware of that. And just, I don't see it explicit enough in here.
Yeah, okay.
We can definitely include some things like that. A bit of context, we did start with a very directive kind of legalistic type list of principles, and through workshopping we actually have landed on a more aspirational, what we would like for Hamilton list. So what I'm hearing is we could potentially put back some of those.
So it's because from a Hamilton lens, we've got to be, we work cross-boundary, and I get that, but we've got to be mindful of the benefits within the city, in our city, right, our boundary. We represent our ratepayers here. And so, for example, the base going, I know it's history, but the base had an impact. It's a great hub now, but it had an impact on the CBD unintendedly, because there was no way of preventing that. So I just want to make sure that we don't allow so much out-of-boundary development that we inadvertently have an effect on the development we're trying to achieve. And I don't see quite that. I feel like I'm being a bit clumsy with my wording today, but I don't see it as thoroughly articulated in here as I might like.
I hear what you're saying. I think
Yeah, we can definitely, we'll go back and have a look.
Does anybody else understand my brain?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. I notice both the base and Ruakura the solutions were imposed on us by bodies that had legal authority over us. It wasn't a decision by this council that the Board of Inquiry in one case and the Environment Court in the other.
I get that through you, Mr. Chair, and that's why the explicit nature of provisions is important, because if they're absent, then there's a whole raft of interpretation that applies in the law.
Okay. Sorry, Ryan's back in for another.
Yeah, sorry, just a question that came out of that, not sure, probably to Jen, with regard to Mayor Paula's concerns. Isn't that, when you bring in the base example or Ruakura, isn't that when the district plan provisions kick in that prevent or limit activity that's incongruent with NPSUD or that sort of stuff?
Yes, it does. I think that the HUG's work, not so much these principles, but the HUG's work will help support the direction that the city is taking in that space. So HUG should lay out the nature and sequence of the development that we want from a growth perspective for the city, and then the district plan provisions underpin making that actually happen. So, long way to say yes, you're right.
Thanks.
Okay, councillors, I will move the staff recommendation over seconder. Ryan, thanks. We'll just go to debate, and I've heard there's a couple of people want to save things for debate, so I'm expecting we'll have one. But just briefly say that I'm happy with this as a starting point, because we have, you'll remember the map that Blair supplied to us last meeting. I had a series of blue pimples around the outside of the city. Some of the pimples were growing quite large, and they were all areas that wanted to develop outside our city boundary, and there were good reasons if you looked at them in isolation, but there were no principles that would allow us to say, well, here's something that you have to satisfy in order to get your development away. And we had nothing that we could sort of promote or say that this is your guidelines. So this is the start of that. It's not the end of the process, as I think Jeff elicited from the answers to his questions. It's the first step first public step in the process. After this, we have some reworking or additions to them. We test the principles, was suggested, and that's the middle one. The next one that comes up, we tested in a couple of areas, and there's been some examples possibly raised both in the report and in the meeting. And we refine them as we go, and we also, it leads to decisions on what our funding policies for growth are as well, and presumably will lead to us being more or less aggressive in terms of our relationships with neighbouring councils, and the whole area of the future of local government may arise out of this. So I'm pleased that we've started this. I would like to be able to go to someone like those SL1 people and say, okay, if you guys really want to get it going, show us how you satisfy all of these principles, how you meet our desire in these areas. If we don't, at the moment, we can't do that. So we've got them queuing up outside the door 5 deep at the moment, and we need to be able to move that open the door a bit, but maybe open it far enough to shove out a bit of paper saying, come back when you've satisfied them. That's probably a bit of a broad brush way of saying it, but at the moment, we are stymied. We have the considerations that still to make that Paula, for instance, talked about with the, yeah, that's good, but don't stuff up this other stuff we're trying to do as well. We've obviously got to work on that to make sure that the overall city gains out of some development like that. But I think we're all aware that because the boundaries are so constricted, it doesn't matter whether you've got a 50% or a 70% infill policy, you're going to need some more green fields, and it's not always in future not going to be able to be all supplied by what's inside the current city boundaries. So here's a start at addressing that. That's me, Councillor Ryan, thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, just really quickly, one of the things that excites me about this is, this is just a starting point. There's going to be lots more input from elected members as we develop this. But for the first time, as far as I know, we're going to be looking at urban design without having to retrofit. We have such debated conversations about cars and bikes and separated things. This is now the opportunity when these things come to us, we're going to be future-proofing that sort of conversation, which is really exciting. And the other big one is value uplift. We've got this major housing affordability issue across New Zealand, and we've had serious land banking issues as people change territorial authorities and as we go from rural to residential zoning. And for the first time, we're saying developers that those days are over. If you're going to come into the city, we've got a big laundry list of requirements you have to provide, and this is a pretty robust thing. And developers actually going, yep, we understand, and they're now forming up conglomerates because they can't do it on their own. So we're not going to get tin pot 300 lot developers. We're going to get comprehensive development, which enables us to get comprehensive structure plans, and for once do some really good design in and around the city. So this is just a first phase, and I think it's really exciting. Thank you.
So can I just, before we go further, just note that we tweak the wording just to ensure that the changes raised here, like Paula's issue and the earlier issue, the issue from Ollie and so forth, get thrown into that mix. So sorry to do that, and I should have said that before I spoke. Yeah.
Totally support that. Yeah, look, thank you. And look, I'll be really, really brief just to clear up anything that came up in my questioning. I'm obviously very supportive of this. I mean, I drive down Fifth Avenue with despair looking at houses right up against the road, meaning we can't widen the road like we'd want to, or put down cycle lanes like was the original intention because of little blips and little slip-throughs and the lack of this kind of work. So totally supportive of it. All I would urge is that when we get ourselves all excited and trendy with our phrasing of our 15-minute communities and 20-minute cities and whatever next is popping out the jargon pipe, we just don't get carried away with ourselves. And we make sure that it's really crystal clear and really simple. I mean, a 15-minute neighbourhood and a 20-minute city, I know what both of those are, and I know they're very different things, but they look like they're the same, and they look like we're confused. So let's just be really careful with our jargon. That's all I'm saying with that. Let's not, put too many chocks under the wheel or cause too much causal nexus with what we're trying to achieve.
We need more thinking.
Yeah, so perhaps we put some thinking money towards that. Yeah, no, I'm just saying, let's just be simple with it, be really simple with it.
Thanks. Mayor Paula, thanks.
No, I support the work. I think it's trending in the right direction, but I think sometimes you've got to be quite explicit because otherwise opportunities go faster than they're out of phase and they don't reach the outcomes we want. I'm interested in very much in the infill conversations we're having in the city and using a compact urban form so that we get different typologies within our city. If we make it much more attractive to live outside of the boundaries in the way described, then we might leave some existing communities behind, because I understand what Councillor Hamilton is saying about this being able to deliver much higher standards, and it will. And that's great, because you can build cycleways and pedestrianism and community assets into something. Having said that, you can also leave existing communities of Hamilton behind, and they don't get refreshed and renewed. And I do want to see parts of Melville renewed and refreshed, Enderley, Norton, so that they have mixed typology of housing also and are enriched by the pull-through. Otherwise, some areas will be new and shiny, and some areas will be old and left behind, and we can't have that. There you go.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I wasn't going to speak, but the Mayor inspired me.
That's unusual.
No, you do. But it's consistent with her points, and, you know, it's about runs on the board. When we talk about the new and the shiny, it's getting proper runs on the board from some existing high density. So obviously, you know, district plans can, as we know, say high density, but around that has to be the urban amenity. It's basic stuff, you know, decent footpath, decent street lighting, canopy of trees, rubbish litter collection, just saying those are connected communities. So I'm just picking up that bit that when I think great resolution, great where we're going and being nimble and innovative, but I certainly was inspired by Mayor Paula not to neglect, you know, some of the existing stuff, and there's what's equity of outcome.
Thank you, councillors. That's the end of... Oh, sorry. Ollie, forgot you. Sorry. Your turn.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Dave Hughes from Zoom. I agree with the previous speakers and just wanted to, I guess, reiterate that point of the hustle and bustle and urgency to get all this development going is to not forget the one chance that council has to influence strong, resilient, healthy committees at the grassroots level. Poets Corner, you know, that was developed in 1959, and 60 plus years later we've got the opportunity to try and influence that. I really like what Mayor Paul was talking about, not forgetting those existing communities as well. And to your point in the Chair's report about, you know, a house in Melbourne being $900,000+. It wasn't too long ago, Melbourne was one of those communities where a first-time buyer could reasonably expect to enter the housing market in Melbourne. The other point of this, the final point, is just for Blair, just to raise, you know, a flag, my concern around the workload on staff with this project and every other project that's on the go at the moment.
Thank you, Ollie. Look, we'll move to the vote now. Again, I'll take it. That's the vote with the tweak in yellow, which was to take on board the issues that have been raised here and include them in the iteration of the HUGS report that is to come out and be able to start being used. So with that addition there, that's been moved and seconded. I'll take a show of hands vote. Those in favour raise their hands, and that's unanimous. Thanks. Thank you. Now, councillors, I've had nothing raised with the General Manager's report, so I'm about to move to that be received. The second thing is we've got a couple of other bits. Sorry, I'm just looking at here. I expect we could finish it in about half an hour to 40 minutes. We've got a choice about breaking for lunch for 45 minutes and then doing it, or going through, say, till 1:30, uncut. No, Jen's doing that because she's leaving. But apart from that, it's a good idea.
Russell, we're in.
Yeah, the item in public exclude is a standard report. There's nothing sort of new come out. That's what I was checking before you. And are you willing to give it a go until 1:30, or is that a problem? Hang on. It's two at once. I couldn't hear.
Is that, Mr. Chair, within the Public Service Association, any contracts that may relate to our staff in terms of lunch break guidelines?
Staff have already said to me, and this is not the management, this is the staff, that the sooner I can finish, the better it is for them today because they're short-staffed. Sarah, you looked a bit doubtful. Can you manage that?
Okay.
Can you?
If there's general consensus, I
Okay.
can manage
Look,
that.
let's try.
I'll just make sure that.
Yeah, if it looks like we're not going to get there, or there's some other problems arising, we can always break more easily, okay, more early. Sorry. Yep.
We've still got numbers if Councillor Thompson needs to go.
Yes. Yep. We've got two members on Zoom plus us. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. We're right. Okay. So I'll move that the General Manager's report be received, seconded by Ryan. Those in favour, against, that's carried. Now, councillors, we're on to item. What are we?
Sorry, that one was just the information only.
Yeah, sorry, I was just looking at checking that we had nothing else. We've done the written submissions, so we're now on to.
Resolution to exclude.
Yeah, I'm trying to find where that is, but what? Oh yeah, item 11. Yeah, so I'll move that resolution to exclude the public, seconded by Jeff. Thanks. Those in favour, against, that's carried. Now.